This woman named Sunja sneaked up to the nursery. She picked up the frightened and crying baby girl with a heavy heart and lifted her own clothes. After feeding, the baby girl immediately stopped crying with a satisfied look on her face. Sunja's own child had just passed away due to complications during childbirth, so she treated the baby girl as her own and prepared to take her home. It turned out that Sunja's husband, Detective Park, had been shot and killed while arresting a fugitive. The huge blow was too much for Sunja, who was 9 months pregnant, to bear. By the time the baby girl was born, it was already dead. The series of blows caused Sunja to suffer a serious mental breakdown. She mistook another newborn baby for her own child, unaware that the child she was holding was actually the fugitive's wife's baby. The fugitive's wife had been mistakenly killed while trying to stop the arrest, but fortunately, the baby girl in her womb survived. After Sunja stole the baby girl, a few days later, Detective Park's colleague Yansik came to adopt the fugitive's child. However, the nurse concealed the truth about the baby girl's disappearance and replaced him with another child. Yansik arrived at the infant adoption center, looked at the adorable child in his arms, and felt guilty, repeating "I'm sorry" several times. It turned out that he was the one responsible for all this tragedy. Yansik, in order to advance his career, desperately tried to capture Chang-hoon, who had been wrongly labeled as a serial killer. During the arrest, Yansik, in a moment of panic, first accidentally injured the fugitive's wife and then accidentally injured his colleague, Detective Park. Both men died from Yansik's gunshot wounds. In order to save his own future, Yansik blamed Detective Park's death on the fugitive. Chang-hoon refused to accept the blame that Yansik tried to shift onto him. But one day, a man from the organization that Chang-hoon worked for found him. It turned out that Chang-hoon was not a serial killer, but a man full of justice. He had obtained evidence of the organization's crimes and was preparing to hand it over to the police. To protect itself, the organization framed Chang-hoon as a serial killer, leading to Yansik's efforts to capture Chang-hoon for credit. In the end, Chang-hoon was arrested, and the evidence of the organization's crimes fell into Yansik's hands. The organization offered to help Yansik frame Chang-hoon for the accidental killing of his colleague in exchange for the evidence. However, the organization threatened Yansik by using his daughter's life as leverage, so Chang-hoon had no choice but to take all the blame for Yansik and go to prison. As a result, Yansik successfully arrested the serial killer and achieved his goal of promotion, but he felt incredibly guilty. To ease his conscience, he took Chang-hoon's daughter in and named her Hyejin. In the days that followed, Yansik loved Hyejin as if she were his own daughter. Sunja, who took the fugitive's child, also treated the child as her own. In her heart, she always believed that this child was her own child with her deceased husband, so she named her Soyeon. Sunja worked hard while taking care of the child, believing that this was the only way to raise her child. One day, while she was at work, Soyeon, who was sitting in a stroller, accidentally knocked over all the plates. Not only did the boss make Sunja pay for the damage, but he also fired her on the spot. Sunja felt dejected, thinking that leaving would solve everything, but the boss rushed out, accusing her of stealing money from the store. When Sunja denied it, the boss dragged her to the police station. At the station, he shouted and accused Sunja of being a thief, causing the child to cry hysterically. Unbeknownst to them, the child's cries caught Yonsik's attention. He looked closely and was shocked this was none other than Detective Park's missing wife. With Yonsik's help, Sunja's innocence was quickly proven. He also made the boss apologize to Sunja. Originally, Yansik felt deeply guilty about the death of his colleague, Detective Park. Now, seeing that Sunja had lost her husband because of him and was living a miserable life, this made Yangsik's sense of guilt even greater. So he decided to become Sunja's husband and take good care of them. Sunja looked at Yangsik, who was also raising a child alone, and saw how hard he was working. The two, who were both in the same situation, relied on each other and came together. Of course, Yangsik kept all the truth hidden deep in his heart. He came to Detective Park's grave and swore that he would spend the rest of his life taking care of his wife and daughter to atone for his sins. Time flew by, and 8 years passed. Hyejin and Soyeon grew up together like twins. As the older sister, Hyejin always protected her younger sister Soyeon. If anyone bullied Soyeon, she would teach them a lesson without hesitation. All the other children were so intimidated by her domineering presence that they stood there speechless. Soyeon, on the other hand, was a spoiled and manipulative girl who always played the victim. No matter what trouble she got into, her sister would always step in to resolve it. Taking advantage of her sister's authority, Soyeon would often take revenge by stealing others' toys. Hyejin, who was sensible and obedient, is doted on by her mother. Soyeon, who is always causing trouble, is often neglected by her mother. One day, Soyeon was playing with matches in the classroom. The next moment, she threw the burning match directly onto a sketchbook. As the fire grew larger, Soyeon was scared and ran out of the classroom. Fortunately, the teacher noticed the fire in time and quickly put it out. However, Soyeon's escape was seen by her sister. Hyejin knew that her sister must have caused the fire, so she quickly found her sister and asked her about it. But Soyeon didn't think she was wrong and cried to her sister instead. It turned out that Soyeon was jealous of her sister, who was not only better than her in every way, but also loved by their mother at home and loved by their teachers at school. So, in a fit of anger, Soyeon set fire to her sister's art book to vent her dissatisfaction. Hyejin did not blame Soyeon, but took out a handkerchief and wiped the dust off her face. She even took off her own hair ribbon and tied it on her sister's head. Hyejin told her sister that she would not tell anyone about what happened today and that it would be as if it never happened. However, when the two returned home, their teacher was already waiting for them. It turned out that the teacher had found the hair ribbon that Soyeon had left behind at the scene of the fire and asked them whose it was. At that moment, the kind-hearted Hyejin took the initiative to admit that it was hers. This made their parents, who were standing nearby, unable to believe their ears. How could Hyejin, who was always so sensible and well-behaved, do such a dangerous thing? Young-sik could only apologize to the teacher and say that he had failed to raise his children properly. Hyejin was severely beaten by her father. Soyeon watched her sister take the blame for her and receive such punishment, but she remained unmoved. No matter how much her father beat Hyejin, she couldn't bring herself to tell him why she had lit the fire. Sunja ran in to stop him, allowing Hyejin to escape. Fortunately, Hyejin's punishment on behalf of her sister was not in vain. Soyeon felt deeply guilty and apologized to her sister, then tenderly applied medicine to her wounds. However, the revelation of Hyejin's true identity shattered her once happy life and plunged her into misery. That day, Young-sik's family of 5 returned home from an outing. Detective Lee, a colleague from the police station, had been waiting there for a long time, intending to have a drink with Young-sik. When Detective Lee saw Sunja holding the 2 children, his brows furrowed. At the dinner table, Detective Lee couldn't understand why Young-sik had let Sunja raise the daughter of a fugitive. After all, she was the daughter of the man who had killed Sunja's husband. Detective Lee was very worried for Young-sik, fearing that if Sunja found out about this, she wouldn't be able to bear the blow. But Young-sik naively believed that as long as they kept the secret, everything would be fine. He didn't know that Sunja had heard their entire conversation when she came to return the wallet. Sunja finally learned that Hyejin, the daughter she had lovingly raised for almost 9 years, was actually the daughter of her enemy. She thought of how her husband had died because of Hyejin's biological father, shattering her happy family. Now she was raising her enemy's daughter as her own. Sunja couldn't accept this blow and couldn't believe it. To prove the truth, she found the adoption papers for Hyejin at home. After learning the truth, Sunja collapsed in agony. Just then, Young-sik returned home and saw his wife holding the adoption papers for Hyejin. He never imagined that the secret he had vowed to keep forever would be uncovered by his wife. In the midst of Sunja's emotional breakdown, Young-sik could only keep apologizing. However, apologies could not erase the immense pain in Sunja's heart. The next day, Sunja went to the prison to find Chang-hoon. She wanted to see if Chang-hoon had repented for his crimes. However, Sunja's husband was not killed by Chang-hoon, and he also had his own grievances. Chang-hoon showed no signs of remorse in front of Sunja. This made Sunja even more furious, and she decided to take out all her anger on his daughter. In the days that followed, Sunja began to speak harshly to Hyejin and target her in every way. Whenever Hyejin made even the slightest mistake at home, she would be harshly scolded by Sunja. Unaware of the truth, Hyejin cried tears of sadness. She didn't know why her mother suddenly hated her so much. Sunja couldn't stand living with Hyejin anymore. She left Hyejin on the side of the road and said, "I'm not your mother." Then Sunja pulled Soyeon away and left decisively. Soyeon didn't understand and asked her mother why she abandoned her sister. Sunja told Soyeon that Hyejin was picked up from the trash by her father and had nothing to do with her. When they returned home, Young-sik didn't see Hyejin. Only then did he realize that his wife had abandoned Hyejin. At that moment, Sunja was consumed by hatred. She had forgotten that Hyejin was only a 9-year-old child. At that moment, Hyejin was shivering in the cold night rain. Meanwhile, Soyeon suddenly developed a high fever and was rushed to the hospital. The doctor said that Soyeon had acute renal failure and if her condition continued to worsen, She might need a kidney transplant. Sunja was anxious and said she would give her own kidney to save her daughter. The doctor reiterated that the transplant could only be performed between people with the same blood type. After some thought, Sunja quickly realized that Hyojin and Soyeon had the same blood type. At this moment, Yeonsik finally found the pitiful Hyojin in a corner and was heartbroken. Upon learning of Soyeon's illness, Yeonsik rushed to the hospital with Hyojin. Sunja saw Hyojin as a ray of hope. She directly asked Hyojin if she was willing to donate a kidney to save her sister. Hyojin did not hesitate and nodded firmly. This was the only reason Hyojin stayed in this family. Otherwise, she would be abandoned and kicked out by her mother. Yeonsik had always felt guilty and deeply loved Hyojin. He told Hyojin that if she didn't want to donate her organ, no one would force her. Although Soyeon is very important to me, you are also my precious daughter to your father. Yeonsik's words made the injured Hyojin instantly forget all her pain. Hyojin said that Soyeon was her sister and she had to save her. Soyeon saw this heartwarming scene. Instead of thanking her sister, she began to hate her. Soyeon didn't understand why everyone had loved her sister so much since they were little. But now, when she needed love the most, she was alone. She began to despise Hyojin after learning that she wasn't her twin sister. Yeonsik didn't want to see Hyojin stay by his side and be hurt by Sunja, so he said he would send her away. Sunja asked him if he was abandoning Soyeon. Hyojin heard her mother's words and was so heartbroken that she burst into tears. The mother who once loved her was gone forever. Fortunately, Soyeon recovered quickly and did not need a kidney transplant for the time being. Everyone was happy, but Hyojin was very disappointed. She was afraid that her mother would kick her out of the house now that she was no longer useful. Yeonsik came out to comfort her, giving Hyojin the strength to endure. But in the days that followed, Hyojin lived a life of humiliation in front of her mother. Whatever Soyeon wanted, Hyojin had to give up unconditionally. That day, Hyojin sacrificed herself to save her sister and was praised by her teacher. All of her classmates applauded Hyojin's selfless spirit. Seeing her sister enjoying the honor, Soyeon felt even more resentful towards her. In Soyeon's eyes, Hyojin was willing to undergo the transplant surgery solely to avoid being kicked out by her mother. Now, Hyojin was using this lie to enjoy everyone's applause at school, which made Soyeon feel extremely unlucky. She told Hyojin not to pretend to be kind in front of others all day long to win their sympathy. In order to teach Hyojin a lesson, Soyeon took advantage of the fact that everyone was out of class and secretly ran back to the classroom. Soon, a classmate came crying to the teacher, saying that his colored pencils were missing. The teacher asked all the students to put their backpacks on the desks to find the culprit. At that moment, Soyeon coldly looked at Hyojin. Sure enough, the teacher found the missing colored pencils in Hyojin's backpack. Hyojin couldn't defend herself and was punished by the teacher. Soyeon deliberately ran up to her and mocked her. But Hyojin knew very well that it was Soyeon who framed her. She asked her why she did this. Soyeon wasn't worried that the kind Hyojin would tell the teacher the truth, so she shamelessly said, "Because of your kindness, I became a bad child when I was around you." When Sunja found out about this, she hated Hyojin even more. Hyojin watched her mother pack her things, thinking she was going to throw her away. She was so scared that she hurriedly apologized to her mother and begged her not to abandon her. Hyojin then apologized to Soyeon and said she would do whatever she asked her to do in the future. Sunja couldn't possibly abandon Hyojin. If Soyeon's condition worsened in the future, there would be no one else who could donate. She arranged for Hyojin to live in a dark and dirty attic. Although Hyojin was in pain, she was grateful that she still had a home. And so, Hyojin continued to live in the cramped attic, ready to save Soyeon's life at any moment. 10 years later, Hyojin had grown into a 19-year-old woman. In order to support herself, she took on a part-time job. Although it was hard work, she was happy. One day, as she was passing by a luxurious villa, she saw a man climbing over the wall. As the daughter of a police officer, Hyojin immediately thought that the man was a thief. She picked up the newspaper in her hand and threw it at him. The man was hit and fell down, but he landed on top of Hyojin. Just like that, the fates of the two were completely intertwined. Hyojin's first kiss was given away so casually. She didn't give the man a chance to explain, believing him to be a real thief. Hyojin then took the man to the police station and handed him over to her police officer father. Hyojin excitedly told her father about her heroic arrest. Yeonsik was angry when he saw his daughter stealing his handcuffs again. Suddenly, he remembered that it was Hyejin's day for a medical examination at the hospital. Hyejin suddenly remembered that she had to go to the hospital and left in a panic. She didn't know that the man she thought was a thief was the son of the villa owner. Mrs. Lim rescued her son and scolded him severely. Taejun had always been a poor student, but he was working hard to achieve his dream of becoming a singer. Hyejin rushed home as fast as she could, but she still missed her appointment at the hospital. Soyeon was very angry and grabbed Hyejin's luggage, telling her to get out of the house. She believed that Hyejin was deliberately delaying the kidney transplant. Soyeon refused to listen to Hyejin's explanation and insisted that she leave the house immediately. Sunja was worried that Soyeon would tire herself out, so she rushed over and told her to go back inside and rest. She told Soyeon that there was no need to get angry with someone like that and hurt herself. Hyejin had no choice but to take her luggage and go out onto the street. The supermarket owner saw Hyejin's clothes and knew that she had been kicked out by her mother again. What could a mother possibly be dissatisfied with in a daughter who is so kind, beautiful, and studious? If I had a daughter like you, I would be blessed for 8 lifetimes. Hyejin hoped that the owner would extend her part-time work hours so she could earn money for her tuition. Hyejin, who hadn't eaten in a day, asked the owner to give her some rice balls that were about to expire to fill her stomach. Seeing a girl like Hyejin, the owner felt sorry for her, so he did his best to help Hyejin. Meanwhile, Soyeon, who was loved by her mother, not only ate well and wore nice clothes, but also got to go to her idol's concert. Soyeon's idol was Taejun, a chaebol's son who was hiding his passion for music from his family. That day, Soyeon came to the restaurant and saw her idol, whom she had been thinking about, and was very excited. At that moment, Taejun was thinking about Hyejin, who had mistaken him for a thief that morning. He decides that if he sees her again, he will teach Hyejin a lesson. As Soyeon is leaving, she sees Taejun being picked up by a wealthy woman in a luxury car. Her best friend tells her that Taejun is not only a good singer, but also the heir to a wealthy family. Hearing this, Soyeon is even more excited and vows that he will be her future husband. The boss introduces Hyejin to a high-paying job as a tutor, but the requirement is that the tutor must be a college student. But to earn more tuition money, Hyejin, a high school student, decided to give it a try. Unfortunately, she didn't have a single decent outfit at home. Just then, her younger brother walked in, pushed her into Soyeon's room, and told her to take any nice clothes she wanted. Hyejin was worried that if Soyeon found out she had taken them, she would scold her, so she wrote a note promising to return them soon. Soon, Hyejin arrived at the villa according to the address. To her surprise, this was the very villa where the thief had been caught. Although Hyejin is also a high school student, her excellent grades have given her the ability to tutor all high school students. Mrs. Lim did not notice anything suspicious and only told Hyejin that her son's situation was special and that many teachers had been fired. She hoped that Hyejin would do her best to teach him as long as he could get into college. Hyejin happily agreed, but when she went upstairs, she did not see the owner, but found a note left on the table. Confused, Hyejin, who was thirsty, picked up a can of cola and drank it in one gulp. Soon, the effects of the drug kicked in, making Hyejin dizzy. Just then, Taejun, who had sneaked out, climbed back in through the window. The two locked eyes and recognized each other immediately. As Taejun was surprised, Hyejin mistook him for the burglar again. She immediately tried to grab him, thinking he was the thief. Hyejin was pushed to the ground by an angry Taejun. Just as she was about to call the police, the effects of the medicine kicked in, and she fainted. Taejun looked at Hyejin, who was unconscious. It was then that he realized that the Hyejin in front of him might be the new teacher who had just arrived today. When Hyejin woke up, she saw Taejun sleeping beside her. She first sneaked outside and called the police. When she returned, she saw Taejun taking off his pants. This made Hyejin add another perverted crime to Taejun's list. She grabbed a weapon and rushed over to teach this thief a lesson. Taejun was speechless that he was being attacked in his own room. Unexpectedly, while the two were struggling, Hyejin accidentally broke the guitar that was nearby. This made the chaebol's son heartbroken. At this moment, the nanny heard the noise and rushed to the room to explain. Hyejin was embarrassed to realize that the man in front of her was her student. Taejun angrily asked her what she was doing. Hyejin was ashamed and left the villa in the middle of the night. However, Taejun became very interested in Hyejin. When Hyejin returned, She saw that her sister had been waiting angrily at the door for a long time. Soyeon saw Hyejin return and immediately tore at her clothes. She angrily scolded Hyejin for embarrassing her in public. It turned out that the outfit Hyejin had secretly taken was the one Soyeon had carefully prepared for Taejin's concert. Because Hyejin had taken it, she had to wear another outfit to the concert and ended up wearing the same outfit as someone else. Taejun thought Soyeon was wearing a fan outfit, so when Soyeon saw Hyejin, she couldn't help but fly into a rage and teach her a lesson. Hearing the commotion, everyone in the house came out. Yeonsik tried to explain for Hyejin, saying it was just a piece of clothing. Why make such a big deal out of it? Sunja directly accused Hyejin of being a thief and threatened to lock all the doors in the house from now on. Hyejin endured the pain and cried tears of sorrow. Yeonsik watched the scene unfold, feeling heartbroken and at a loss for what to do. The next day, Taejun finished his errands early and rushed back home to wait for Hyejin, but his mother asked him what he had been doing. The new teacher had quit after less than a day on the job. Taejun had no intention of letting Hyejin get away with accusing him of theft twice. It turned out that Hyejin felt she had caused trouble and didn't plan on continuing as a tutor, so Taejun found her at the address listed on her resume. He took out the guitar that Hyejin had broken and demanded compensation. Hyejin, who lived in poverty, didn't have any extra money to pay him. However, this was exactly what Taejun wanted, so he told Hyejin to continue tutoring him and pay him back slowly. Hyejin had no choice but to agree. In order to have a nice dress, she decided to make one herself since she didn't have the money to buy one. Hyejin quickly made a beautiful dress out of old clothes. The next day, when Hyejin appeared wearing the dress she had made, Taejun was shocked. Taejun didn't expect Hyejin to be so beautiful. In fact, he had unknowingly fallen in love with this lively and kind girl. During the next tutoring session, he couldn't concentrate on his studies and just stared at Hyejin. When Hyejin finished work and returned home, she ran into Soyeon. Soyeon looked at Hyejin's beautiful dress and instantly became jealous, so she took it and put it on, then went shopping. Taejun saw this and was very confused as to why Hyejin's clothes were on someone else. Out of curiosity, Taejun approached Soyeon and complimented her on her dress. Taejun's unintentional gesture made Soyeon's heart flutter. Soyeon thought that Taejun was captivated by her beauty. In the days that followed, Taejun couldn't stop thinking about Hyejin and would go look for her whenever he had nothing to do. But one day, he accidentally saw Hyejin with a man. This man was a friend Hyejin had met while working part-time at a supermarket. However, this man would go on to influence Hyejin's entire life. Taejun felt very uncomfortable. In order to have a reasonable excuse to have Hyejin tutor him every day, Taejun said that he would study hard to get into college and take over the family business, and promised to give her a raise. Love is truly a mysterious thing. The next day, while tutoring Hyejin, Taejun took the opportunity to secretly look through her bag. Unexpectedly, he found some men's underwear and a love lunchbox. Taejun thought that Hyejin had prepared them for the man from yesterday. He then followed Hyejin, who had finished work, with the intention of destroying them. On the way, Taejun learned that Hyejin had actually brought the items for her father, who was on a mission despite it being his birthday. This finally cleared things up for Taejun. Upon arriving at the location, Hyejin called her father to come pick up the items. However, just as the two were waiting at the supermarket entrance, the fugitive happened to appear there. The patrolling police immediately noticed him, drew their guns, and attempted to arrest him. To protect himself, the fugitive took Taejun hostage, leaving Hyejin in a state of panic. Just as the situation was reaching a critical point, Yeonsik finally arrived. He signaled to Hyejin to stay calm and not make a sound. Then Yeonsik approached the fugitive, seized the opportunity, and rescued Taejun. However, the ruthless fugitive stabbed Yeonsik in the abdomen with a knife. Hyejin sat outside the emergency room, crying and worried. Upon receiving the news, Sunja and others rushed to the hospital. Sunja looked at Hyejin, who was crying uncontrollably, and slapped her hard across the face. She blamed Hyejin for everything. Sunja also cursed Hyejin, calling her a monster who had caused her to lose her husband and now was trying to kill another. Clearly, Sunja had framed Hyejin for her husband's death, all because Hyejin was the biological daughter of the man who had killed her husband. At that moment, the heartbroken Hyejin had no idea about the truth and did not understand what her mother was saying. Just then, the doctor emerged from the emergency room and announced that Yeonsik was out of danger and would be able to leave the hospital after a short recovery period. Relieved, Hyejin hid outside, tears streaming down her face, Filled with self-blame, she had always tried her best to do everything right in order to gain her mother's approval. But why did things always end up getting worse, leading to her father's injury? Hyojin wonders if this is why her biological parents abandoned her. Over the years, Hyojin has never resented her adoptive mother for what she did to her. Instead, she is grateful and wants to do her best to raise them. Taejun sees this scene from afar and feels pity for her. He secretly decides to protect this tragic girl. At his concert, Taejun loudly confessed his feelings to Hyojin in the audience. At first, Soyeon thought Taejun was talking about her, but when Taejun said it was Hyojin, Soyeon was struck by lightning and couldn't believe it. This made Soyeon resent Hyojin even more. In Soyeon's heart, she believed that whatever she wanted, her sister must give her unconditionally. She warned Hyojin not to accept Taejun's confession no matter what happened. Otherwise, she would make sure that Hyojin would be punished by her mother. Soyeon, who had always been proud of being Youngsik's biological daughter, vented her emotions in Hyojin's room. There, she accidentally found a stack of photos that finally revealed that she was not related to Youngsik by blood. The photos were of her mother with a big belly and a strange man. Soyeon instantly realized that the child in her mother's womb might have been herself. She took the photos to her mother to confirm, but her mother couldn't say a word. So she went to find her father, who was still recovering from his injuries in the hospital. Soon, Soyeon learned the truth from her father. It turned out that she and Hyojin were not her father's biological daughters. The always proud and arrogant Soyeon couldn't accept this blow and fainted on the spot. Youngsik looked at Soyeon and felt guilty because it was his mistake that led to the death of Soyeon's father and caused her to lose her loved ones. Sunja took Soyeon to the cemetery to visit her real father. Seeing that her father was also a police officer, Soyeon felt a little comforted. Sunja had been haunted by her husband's death for decades. However, the murderer who killed her husband had never been severely punished. Determined to see the murderer punished, Sunja devised a cruel plan. Without Hyojin's knowledge, she had her distribute leaflets about Changhun's alleged crimes. Sunja wanted everyone to know about Changhun's crimes and gain public support. Youngsik, who had been released from the hospital, arrived at the scene and saw the flyers in Hyojin's hands revealing that Changhun was a serial killer, which made him furious. When he found out that it was his wife who had asked Hyojin to do this, he became even more angry. He pulled Sunja aside and scolded her, asking how she could let her own daughter get everyone to sign a petition to kill her own father. Youngsik couldn't accept his wife's cruel behavior. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was clearly heard by Hyojin and Soyeon, who were standing nearby. Hyojin was filled with pain and disbelief. Soyeon, however, felt even more hatred toward Hyojin. The sister she had grown up with was actually the daughter of the man who had killed her father. She finally understood why her mother had hated Hyojin so much all along. Soyeon returned home and smashed the family photo she had with Hyojin. She swore she would never forgive Hyojin, Changhun, or her mother. Soyeon rushed to the newspaper office to expose Hyojin's identity as Changhun's daughter. The next day, a large group of journalists swarmed to interview Hyojin. Soyeon's actions not only caused Hyojin even more pain but also made her mother the target of condemnation. She stood by coldly, watching everything unfold. She didn't realize her impulsive actions would bring a huge crisis upon herself. Soyeon revealed the truth about Hyojin posing as a college student and working as a tutor to Taejun. However, Taejun was thrilled, finding Hyojin's actions amusing and even more adorable. As Soyeon was returning, a man quickly approached her and covered her mouth tightly with a handkerchief. When she regained consciousness, she was terrified to find that she was tied to the roof of a skyscraper rooftop. At that moment, the kidnappers approached and fiercely asked Soyeon if she was the daughter of a serial killer. It turned out that the men who kidnapped Soyeon were the families of the victims of the serial killer. The kidnappers mistakenly believed that Soyeon was Changhun's daughter, so they kidnapped her to blackmail Changhun into accepting the death penalty. This was Soyeon's punishment for her own actions. If she hadn't exposed Hyojin as Changhun's daughter, she wouldn't have been in such danger. Sunja watched her kidnapped daughter below, anxious that something might happen. She hurriedly told Hyojin to admit that she was Changhun's daughter and take Soyeon's place. Sunja didn't care if Hyojin was in danger. Hyojin again blamed herself for hurting her family. Her younger brother held her back so she wouldn't run up to them. Fortunately, the police quickly arrested the kidnappers. Soyeon was still in shock but was not hurt. However, after this incident, Sunja and Soyeon completely hated Hyojin. The mother and daughter blamed all their misfortunes on Hyojin. Hurt, Hyojin thought she was a burden and decided to leave home. She believed everyone would be happier if she disappeared. When Youngsik returned, he only found a note left by Hyojin. Reading Hyojin's note, Yeon-sik was heartbroken and kept apologizing. He was supposed to bear all the pain, but instead, Hyojin had to bear all the pain she shouldn't have. In that moment, Yeon-sik swore to himself that he would find Hyojin no matter what. Hyojin left without saying goodbye to Taejun, embarking on a journey to an unknown destination with reluctance and memories. 8 years later, Hyojin was now a young woman working at a clothing market. Back then, when she was living on the streets, she was taken in by a scruffy old man. She learned a lot of sewing skills from him. Hyojin, who was naturally talented, used the sewing skills she had learned to make clothes that were popular with many customers. Grateful for his kindness, Hyojin took good care of the man. She never went to the hospital when she was sick because she was afraid of revealing that she was the daughter of a murderer. Hyojin could only take medicine to relieve her symptoms. The man, who didn't know the truth, felt very sorry for Hyojin. So-yeon ran away to work at Taejun's company in order to become the daughter-in-law of a wealthy family. Taejun had been studying abroad since losing contact with Hyojin 8 years ago and had just returned to Korea. So-yeon believed that without Hyojin, she could marry the uncle. However, what So-yeon never expected was that the company faced a major crisis and needed a top-notch seamstress. While searching for a technician, Taejun accidentally discovered Hyojin's whereabouts. He noticed that the trademark pattern on a piece of underwear was the same as the one Hyojin had used before. Taejun was thrilled and followed the production address of the underwear to the clothing market. After much effort, he was unable to find Hyojin. Just as he was about to give up, the girl who had been haunting his dreams suddenly appeared in front of him. Hyojin did not want to reveal herself to Taejun and chose to run away. But before long, she ran into So-yeon. At first, Hyojin thought that So-yeon had come to take her home and was very excited. So-yeon told her not to get her hopes up, that she was only looking for a seamstress. When she saw the product in Hyojin's hands, she realized it was exactly what the company was looking for. So-yeon felt jealous and began to worry that Hyojin's appearance would bring her life back to square one. She warned Hyojin to pretend today never happened and not to show up in front of her family again, bringing more misfortune. So-yeon thought she could get away with it, but before she knew it, Taejun had found Hyojin. Taejun was overjoyed to discover that Hyojin was the technician the company had been searching for so diligently. He immediately brought Hyojin to the company and had her demonstrate her true skills in front of his mother. Mrs. Lim was highly impressed by Hyojin's skills. This made So-yeon extremely unhappy. Taejun hoped Hyojin would work for the company. However, Hyojin refused outright because So-yeon was also working there. Taejun swore that he would do anything to get Hyojin, not only for the company but also for himself, so he bought the shop where Hyojin worked. But Hyojin still refused to go to the company, which puzzled Taejun. So-yeon was very worried that Hyojin's appearance would threaten her, so she warned Hyojin to leave immediately and never show up again. Taejun overheard what So-yeon said. So-yeon claimed she had come to persuade Hyojin to return to the company to help it through this crisis. But Hyojin was selfish and didn't care about others. That's why I told her to leave and live freely. I can't force someone who doesn't want to work at the company to stay. Hyojin knew her sister had always liked Taejun and didn't expose her lie. She had no choice but to endure all the pain and admit that what So-yeon said was true. At this point, So-yeon had no choice but to feign concern and once again urge Hyojin to return to work in front of Taejun. The next day, Taejun brought Hyojin to meet his mother. Mrs. Lim had high expectations for Hyojin's arrival. So-yeon could never allow Hyojin to stay at the company in peace. On her first day back at work, rumors began circulating on the company's official website that Hyojin was living with an older man at a clothing market. It was clear that all of this was done by So-yeon to drive Hyojin away. This blow to her self-respect caused Hyojin immense pain. It also made her the laughingstock of the entire company and subjected her to bullying. Hyojin knew that all of this was So-yeon's doing, which made her very sad. Since So-yeon didn't want to see her, she decided to leave. So-yeon warned Hyojin that if she left, she shouldn't let Taejun harbor any illusions. Before leaving, Hyojin wanted to see Taejun one last time, but Taejun said he didn't have time. Unexpectedly, when she returned home, Taejun had prepared a large meal and was waiting for her to come home. This scene deeply moved Hyojin, who had been living alone for many years, since her mother began to hate her. This was the first time Hyojin had felt the warmth of home. Although the food didn't taste very good, it was delicious to Hyojin. Taejun took a bite and immediately spat it out. After dinner, Hyejin made a cute pendant for Taejun. She was very grateful to Taejun for giving her strength when she was in pain. Hyejin said bluntly that Taejun was a good man and that she longed for a love like his. But when she thought of the fact that Taejun was the man her sister loved deeply, she could only choose to back out as usual. However, when So-yeon urged Hyejin to leave again that day, an accident happened. A billboard fell from the sky, and Hyejin didn't hesitate to rush over and save So-yeon. However, she was hit on the head by the billboard. So-yeon had no choice but to take Hyejin to the hospital for treatment. It was this accident that allowed Hyejin's father, who had been searching for her, to find out about her whereabouts. However, Sunja, who was at home, answered the phone and heard the news first. Sunja was very angry that Yongsik had been searching for Hyejin behind her back. She followed the address to the hospital and found the injured Hyejin. Upon seeing Hyejin, Sunja showed no concern for her injuries. Without asking any questions, she demanded that Hyejin leave immediately. At that moment, So-yeon entered the ward with a tray of tea. Seeing this, Sunja became even more furious. She scolded Hyejin for allowing her daughter to work as a maid. One could only wonder if Hyejin was being kind or cowardly at that moment. Fortunately, Yongsik finally found out that Hyejin was in the hospital. 8 years of longing brought father and daughter into a tight embrace. Yongsik wanted Hyejin to return to him and live together. Hyejin wanted to return to her father, but she was concerned about her mother and So-yeon. After all, her biological father was the murderer of Soyeon's biological father, so Hyejin could only say words that were not true and refused to return. Yongsik comforted her, telling her not to think too much about it. Hyejin's return was the last thing So-yeon wanted to see. The next morning, So-yeon forcibly dragged Hyejin out of the hospital room and demanded she disappear immediately. But Hyejin didn't want to leave secretly like she did 8 years ago, causing her father pain. She said she wanted to say goodbye to her father before leaving. So-yeon firmly refused, insisting Hyejin leave immediately. At that moment, Yongsik heard the commotion and came out just in time to witness the scene. He finally learned that Hyejin's injuries were caused while saving So-yeon. Yongsik was furious at Soyeon's actions and slapped her across the face. This scene was witnessed by Sunja, who had just arrived. Sunja rushed forward and slapped Hyejin across the face. She immediately ordered Hyejin to leave immediately and never return. Yongsik said that So-yeon was his daughter, but Hyejin was also his daughter. Hyejin blamed herself for bringing unhappiness to the family again. Although Yongsik felt guilty, he insisted on taking Hyejin home to make up for all the years he had wronged her. However, the presence of Sunja and So-yeon prevented him from fulfilling his wish. Hyejin didn't want to see her father torn between them, so she chose to leave silently once again. Yongsik can only drown his sorrows in alcohol. At this moment, Miho arrives to comfort his father. Yongsik tells his son that everything Hyejin is going through is his fault, but in Miho's eyes, his father is the most respectable and just police officer. He even vows to become a police officer like his father one day. Miho's words pierce Yongsik's heart deeply. He had sacrificed everything for fame and fortune, shifting all the blame onto Hyejin's biological father. Yongsik felt both ashamed and guilty at that moment. Taejun couldn't get in touch with Hyejin and was very worried. He had no choice but to contact people in the underworld and search for her nationwide at any cost. On Soyeon's side, without Hyejin as an obstacle in the company, she quickly gained Mrs. Lim's favor. Mrs. Lim even asked her to work with Taejun on the project plan. So-yeon was overjoyed and had already started fantasizing about what to name her child with Taejun. Just as So-yeon believed that with Hyejin out of the way, she could smoothly become Taejun's wife. Unexpectedly, the people Taejun had sent had already found Hyejin's whereabouts. Hyejin thought they were bad guys and tried to escape. However, her injuries, which had not yet healed, caused her to faint suddenly. When she woke up again, Taejun was already by her side. Hyejin finally realized that those bad guys were actually sent by Taejun to find her. This time, Taejun said he would stay by her side as long as she refused to go back. Taejun vowed to protect Hyejin and never let her get hurt again. He called his mother, asking her to send the family doctor over to check on Hyejin's health. So-yeon happened to overhear the conversation between mother and son and immediately grew tense. She never imagined that Taejun was with the missing Hyejin. So-yeon followed the doctor to Hyejin's residence. When Taejun was out, she rushed into Hyejin's room. So-yeon warned Hyejin to leave before Taejun returned. Hyejin begged So-yeon to let her go. She didn't want to continue living a life of running away. For her own happiness, So-yeon forcibly dragged Hyejin out. When Taejun found out, he immediately brought the two back. So-yeon lied again. saying that it was Hyejin who wanted to run away. That night, Taejun found Hyejin under the starry sky and confessed his feelings to her again. But Hyejin still couldn't accept this love that was so desired yet out of reach. So-yeon glared at the heartbreaking scene. She knew that as long as Hyejin was in this world, she could never be with Taejun. So that night, a man sneaked into the room and kidnapped the sleeping Hyejin. The next day, when Taejun discovered Hyejin was missing, he went crazy searching everywhere. When he couldn't find her, he scolded the bodyguards for not doing their job properly at night. However, one of the men smiled maliciously after Taejun left. It turned out that the man who had kidnapped Hyejin was the same man, and this man had been bribed by So-yeon. So-yeon ordered the man to take Hyejin to the other side of the earth and never let her return. Then, So-yeon pretended to be harmless and comforted Taejun. But what So-yeon didn't expect was that Taejun quickly got the news from the boss that Hyejin had been kidnapped. Taejun immediately called Young-sik to tell him about it. Young-sik thought it was the victims who wanted to take revenge on Hyejin's father. He was about to go to the police station when he saw So-yeon making a frantic phone call and walked over. So-yeon didn't notice her father's arrival. She was on the phone with the kidnappers, urging them to send Hyejin out of the country as soon as possible. After hanging up, So-yeon turned around and was so scared she didn't know what to do. Young-sik clearly heard So-yeon's conversation. So-yeon realized that everything had been exposed and could only admit her mistake, begging her father for forgiveness. Meanwhile, Hyejin, who had been tied up, managed to break free and escape. When So-yeon brought her father to the location, Hyejin was already gone. Hyejin, who had escaped, fainted on the road due to a recurrence of her head injury. Taejun saw this and immediately took Hyejin to the hospital. Young-sik rushed over and was relieved to see that Hyejin was unharmed. He then ordered his men who were searching outside to stop investigating the kidnappers. It seemed that Young-sik intended to handle the matter privately, unaware of the truth. Taejun was furious and declared in front of Young-sik that the kidnappers must be caught. Young-sik stood by, unable to speak, his face flushing with embarrassment. As a police officer, he felt deeply frustrated. Although he couldn't send So-yeon to prison himself, Young-sik had to make So-yeon apologize to Hyejin and admit her mistake. Otherwise, he will never forgive So-yeon. So-yeon kneels on the ground and begs her father to forgive her. She even swears that she will treat Hyejin well in the future. Young-sik is adamant that he cannot forgive So-yeon for her crime. Seeing this, So-yeon uses a secret weapon to make her father compromise. However, Young-sik tells her to bring Hyejin home to live with them tomorrow. Hyejin is overjoyed to hear that she can go home. Sunja is very angry to see Hyejin back. She takes out her luggage and asks Young-sik to make a choice. Sunja says that if Hyejin stays in this house, she will leave. Seeing that Young-sik does not give an answer, she stops talking and prepares to leave with her luggage. At this moment, So-yeon rushes to stop her mother. She does not want her father to kidnap her because of her mother's extreme behavior. She reveals the truth about Hyejin. So-yeon's actions puzzled her mother. After 8 years of wandering, Hyejin had finally returned home. Although the journey had been difficult, Hyejin was content. To please her mother, Hyejin got up early and prepared a large meal. However, Sunja was unappreciative and angrily overturned the table. She even said that she would never accept Hyejin. Back in her room, Sunja became angrier and angrier. She couldn't bear to live with the daughter of the woman who killed her husband, so she decided to teach Hyejin a lesson. Sunja deliberately took Hyejin to the victim's family. At the funeral, Hyejin had no idea what was going on. When the victim's family saw Chang-hun's daughter, they were furious and began to verbally abuse and push Hyejin. This had a huge impact on Hyejin's heart. Sunja, however, stood by coldly, watching everything unfold with a sense of satisfaction. Young-sik was furious at his wife's cruel actions. To prevent his wife from harming Hyejin anymore, he had no choice but to reveal that So-yeon was the real culprit who had kidnapped Hyejin. If Hyejin were to find out the truth, So-yeon might face imprisonment. This left Sunja completely panicked. She finally understood why So-yeon had suddenly changed her attitude toward Hyejin. For So-yeon's sake, Sunja ultimately chose to endure Hyejin's presence in the household. However, Sunja used Young-sik's upcoming promotion as an excuse to ask Hyejin not to investigate the kidnapping. Receiving her mother's approval made Hyejin very happy. She immediately agreed not to pursue the matter further. Hyejin thought she could finally live in peace, but Taejun felt sorry for Hyejin, who had been investigating the kidnapping. They discovered the kidnappers were hired by a shadowy crime black boss. Sunja was furious to learn that Hyojin had not followed their agreement. She hurriedly sent her husband to stop Hyojin from continuing the investigation. Just as Hyojin and Taejun were on their way to meet each other, Yeon-sik called Hyojin and told her to come back immediately. At this point, Hyojin had already guessed from Taejun's description that Soyeon was the one behind her kidnapping. This made her feel devastated and unable to believe it. In order to protect Soyeon, Yeon-sik begged Hyojin to stop investigating. Yeon-sik had no choice but to tell her the truth and say that Soyeon had repented. Hyojin was in pain after her suspicions were confirmed. She couldn't understand why Soyeon was so cruel. Hyojin directly asked Soyeon why she did it. However, Soyeon showed no remorse. Instead, she blamed Hyojin, saying that it was all because she was the daughter of a murderer. This reason was very painful for Hyojin. It wasn't her choice to become the daughter of a murderer, since so many people hated her biological father. Hyojin decided to find out what kind of person her father really was. It was during this search that Hyojin found an old newspaper article about the cause of her biological mother's death. It said that her mother had been accidentally shot and killed by her adoptive mother's ex-husband. This was so shocking that she couldn't accept it. She immediately went to find her adoptive father to confirm the story. Yeon-sik would never tell her the truth that he had accidentally killed Hyojin's mother and Sunja's husband. He could only go against his conscience and tell Hyojin that what the newspaper said was true. Yeon-sik pleaded with Hyojin not to pursue the matter further, whether it was for Soyeon's sake or his own. But this made Hyojin feel utterly wronged. It was because her father had killed Soyeon's father that she had been living with guilt all this time. No matter how others had insulted her, she had endured it not because her father was a murderer. Hyojin felt deeply sorry that her father had caused Soyeon's father's death, so she had been enduring all the pain without complaint. But now, the person who killed her biological mother was Soyeon's father. Hyojin decided she shouldn't bear all the pain alone. She directly told her adoptive father that she wouldn't endure it anymore. Yeon-sik was helpless and could only say that what happened back then wasn't anyone's fault. Hyojin made up her mind not to care about her adoptive mother or Soyeon's feelings anymore. In the blink of an eye, Hyojin accepts Taejun's marriage proposal and fights for her own happiness. Soyeon is furious when she sees this. The two sisters finally tear off their masks and refuse to give in to each other. As descendants of murderers, neither of them is superior to the other. For the first time, Hyojin tells Soyeon domineeringly, "I will never let you take anything from me again, including love." Soyeon says that she will not let Hyojin take Taejun away from her. Can Hyojin really protect her love? She has forgotten that she is fighting this battle alone. Taejun really wants to marry Hyojin right away, but his mother does not approve of the marriage. However, this gives Soyeon a chance to steal Taejun away. Soyeon deliberately gives Taejun a plan to take him to a hotel and say that she will call Hyojin later. As long as the reporters expose your intimate behavior tomorrow, your mother will definitely agree. Taejun thinks it's a good plan. All of this was planned by Soyeon for herself. Soyeon had already bribed a reporter. When they entered the hotel, Soyeon deliberately acted intimate with Taejun, causing the reporters to frantically take pictures. Then, when Taejun wasn't paying attention, Soyeon poured the magic potion into his drink. Unaware of the situation, Taejun drank it all. Soon, the drug took effect and Taejun lost consciousness. Soyeon immediately revealed a wicked smile, knowing that her plan had succeeded. The next day, when Taejun woke up, he was shocked to find himself naked in bed with Soyeon. He didn't know what had happened last night. He hoped that Soyeon would keep it a secret and pretend that nothing had happened. But how could Soyeon possibly do what Taejun asked? Soon, news of Taejun and Soyeon entering and exiting the hotel spread everywhere. Taejun was so angry upon hearing the news that he nearly died on the spot. However, Taejun's mother was very pleased with Soyeon, the daughter of a police officer. She directly asked Soyeon to bring her parents to meet them and arrange the marriage. That evening, Soyeon brought everyone in her family except Hyojin. Taejun thought his mother had invited him to dinner alone, so he brought Hyojin along as well. But as soon as the two entered the room, it became extremely awkward. Hyojin finally understood what was going on. When Mrs. Lim asked her adoptive father and the others if they knew Hyojin, none of them said they did. Hyojin left sadly. She didn't understand how even her adoptive father and brother could be so cold. Now she understood that no matter how hard she tried, she would always be an outsider. In order to destroy Hyojin's position in Taejun's heart, Soyeon directly let the reporters expose that the daughter of a serial killer was working at the company. As a result, A bunch of the company's customers quickly came to protest and blame Mrs. Lim for letting them consume products made by the daughter of a murderer. Moreover, someone pointed out that Hyojin standing behind them was the daughter of the murderer. The protesters saw Hyojin and immediately rushed over, pushed her to the ground, and verbally abused her. Hyojin was in pain on the ground, but Soyeon was happy inside. Hyojin looked pitifully at Taejun standing on the side, hoping that he would help her. But Taejun turned his head away and ignored her. At that moment, Hyojin felt hopeless. She hid in the bathroom and cried, feeling so lonely in this world. After that, Taejun not only failed to comfort Hyojin, but instead scolded her for hiding the fact that she was the daughter of a murderer and for dating him. Hyojin demanded, "Aren't you supposed to love me no matter what?" At that moment, Hyojin felt despair for this love that couldn't withstand the test. She no longer harbored any illusions and hoped that Taejun would never appear before her again, ending this relationship. However, what Hyojin didn't expect was that the events that followed would plunge her into an endless abyss. Sunja, to prevent Hyojin's identity from affecting Soyeon and Taejun's wedding, directly announced that she would sever the adoption relationship with Hyojin and become strangers. Young-sik, feeling guilty, didn't want to be so heartless. He hoped Hyojin could go abroad to study and live for a while. The adoptive father's words caused Hyojin immense pain. This hurt her far more than the pain her adoptive mother had caused her. Her adoptive father had always been Hyojin's emotional support. Due to the rumors between Taejun and Hyojin, the company's senior management rejected his proposal to become president. In order to save the situation, Mrs. Lim directly stated at the meeting that Taejun's future wife would be Soyeon. Although Taejun was very dissatisfied with his mother's arbitrary decision, he had to carefully consider the possibility that a woman could ruin his future. This also caused him, who deeply loved Hyojin, great pain. Everything was going against Hyojin's wishes. She also understood that if she continued to stay here and hold on, she would be the one who would end up getting hurt in the end. Since no one loved her, she decided to live only for herself from now on. On this day, Soyeon and a reporter got into an argument on the phone because the payment did not reach the agreed upon amount. Hyojin happened to be hiding nearby and heard their entire conversation. It turned out that all the recent incidents had been orchestrated by Soyeon. Hyojin decided to make Soyeon pay for her actions before leaving. She rushed to the company's celebration party, found Mrs. Lim, and exposed all the dirty deeds Soyeon had done behind her back. Mrs. Lim believed Hyojin was jealous of Soyeon's wedding with Taejun. She then ordered her subordinates to expel Hyojin. Taejun happened to witness the entire scene. He couldn't let go of his love for Hyojin, but Hyojin didn't want to have anything more to do with him. This enraged Taejun. He had to make Hyojin his woman today. Hyojin struggled with all her might to break free and ran away. In her panic, Hyojin ran into a dead-end alley. Just then, a woman suddenly appeared and pulled Hyojin out through another door. Soyeon followed Taejun and caught up with them. In the end, Taejun and Soyeon found Hyojin and Sura in a warehouse. Seeing Taejun's malicious expression, Sura picked up a wine bottle nearby and broke it to warn him not to do anything rash. Taejun, who was slightly drunk, didn't take Sura seriously. The two immediately started fighting. As expected, something unexpected happened. Taejun accidentally killed Sura. However, Sura might not have died if she had received medical attention in time, but Soyeon didn't want her future husband's future to be ruined because of this, so she stopped them from calling the police. At this point, Taejun was so scared that he didn't know what to do. Soyeon told Taejun to take Hyojin and leave immediately, and she would handle the rest. To protect himself, Taejun had no choice but to follow Soyeon's lies and drag Hyojin away. But this was when Hyojin's nightmare truly began. Soyeon didn't hide the fact that Taejun had killed someone from Mrs. Lim. After hearing this, Mrs. Lim agreed with Soyeon that they must do everything to protect Taejun. They decided to frame Hyojin for everything. Soyeon then followed Mrs. Lim's instructions and began erasing all traces of Taejun's involvement. Finally, she chose to call the police and send Sura to the hospital for emergency treatment. Taejun, who had left, was panicking. Hyojin kept urging him to turn himself in to reduce his punishment. Taejun agreed to confess but asked Hyojin to stay silent until he did so. However, the next day, Soyeon personally went to the police station and reported Hyojin as the murderer. The police quickly arrived at Hyojin's room to search for evidence. The blood-stained clothes that had not yet been disposed of were found by the police and became the most direct evidence. Hyojin was taken to the police station for interrogation. At that moment, Hyojin still naively believed that Taejun would turn himself in and confess everything. Upon arriving at the police station, she did not immediately explain the truth of the matter. However, Hyejin's actions only deepened the suspicion against her. Taejun arrived at the police station and immediately stated that it was Hyejin who had killed the victim. Hyejin couldn't believe her ears when she heard this. The vows they had made to each other were now so ridiculous, and it was all because Soyeon had instigated Taejun to do this. Although Taejun still loved Hyejin, his conscience was tormented by what he had done, but compared to protecting his future, he could only ruthlessly sacrifice his feelings and abandon Hyejin. However, at this moment, the man who would influence Hyejin's life finally made his appearance. His name was Inwoo, Sura's lawyer. Although Sura was not dead, she had become a vegetable due to lack of timely medical treatment. Inwoo, who had been investigating Sura's case, reunited with Hyejin after 8 years. Upon learning Inwoo's purpose, Hyejin clung to him like a lifeline. She detailed how Sura had been killed that day. However, there was still no concrete evidence to prove that Taejun was the murderer. Inwoo decides to investigate the case himself. The results are obvious. All the key surveillance footage has disappeared. Inwoo immediately realizes that someone is trying to hide the truth. Hyejin is temporarily released on bail with her adoptive father as guarantor and returns home. No matter how Hyejin explains that she was framed by Taejun, Young-sik and everyone else cannot believe her because all the evidence points to Hyejin. Not being trusted by her foster father left Hyejin deeply hurt. However, there was one person who firmly believed that Hyejin had been framed. That day, Hyejin received a letter from prison. It was from Hyejin's biological father, who wanted to meet her in prison. Chang-hoon had learned about his daughter's ordeal through the newspaper while in prison. What puzzled him was that Hyejin was the one who had framed him and raised him. This was the first time Hyejin had met her biological father. Chang-hoon didn't want Hyejin to carry the burden of being the daughter of a murderer, so he told Hyejin that he had also been framed and wasn't a serial killer. He hadn't killed Detective Park back then, but Chang-hoon thought about how Hyejin was now being raised by Young-sik and didn't reveal the truth. He encouraged Hyejin to live her life with pride. The truth shocked Hyejin. When Hyejin returned home, she suddenly saw a man holding a newspaper with an article about her being the daughter of a murderer. She immediately decided to find a way to clear herself of the crime she had been accused of. The man who had just picked up the newspaper looked fondly at Hyejin's departing figure. It turned out that this man was Chang-hoon's close friend, Min-sik. At that moment, he recalled a memory from decades ago. It turned out that after Hyejin was born, Min-sik had planned to take her in and raise her in place of Chang-hoon. However, he later learned that Hyejin's mother had given birth to twins, and one of them had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Over the years, Min-sik had never found the other missing child. Just as Min-sik was about to leave, he saw Sunja returning with Soyeon. This brought him back to his memories from more than 10 years ago. In fact, at that time, the nurse had already investigated and found out that the person who took the other child was Sunja. Min-sik quickly recognized that the woman was the person he had been looking for. He also recognized Soyeon as the other child he had been looking for. Min-sik was very happy to see that Soyeon was living a happy life. However, he did not know that Soyeon had also been adopted by Young-sik and had become a sister who was at odds with Hyejin. It turned out that Hyejin and Soyeon were actually Chang-hoon's daughters, a pair of twin sisters. Inwoo quickly obtained the dashcam from Taejin's car. He actually found evidence that could prove Taejin's crimes, because the conversation between Hyejin and Taejun in the car that day was all recorded, and it could also prove that Soyeon was an accomplice. Inwoo was worried that if he handed the evidence directly to the police, it might be tampered with, so he decided to expose the truth through a more reliable method. Meanwhile, Min-sik called Young-sik and threatened him. If Young-sik didn't help Hyejin clear her name, he would expose the truth to the public. Young-sik was so frightened by the threat that he didn't know what to do. Just then, the evidence in Inwoo's hands was sent to Taejun. Taejun was so scared that he almost wet his pants. Hyejin also received the evidence. This made Hyejin very happy. With this evidence, she could clear her name. Min-sik called Hyejin and asked her to go with him to scatter her mother's ashes. Hyejin had always wanted to know more about her mother, so she was very excited and rushed to the place where Min-sik had asked her to meet him. However, her departure was witnessed by Soyeon, who had just returned. Soyeon assumed that Hyejin was heading to the police station to hand over the evidence of Taejin's crimes, so she followed her to stop her. Meanwhile, Inwoo, who had been downstairs, saw this and feared that Soyeon might harm Hyejin, so he followed them as well. At the same time, Young-sik received another threat from Min-sik, demanding that he help Hyejin clear her name. Otherwise, Min-sik would give Hyejin the evidence that he had accidentally killed Chang-hoon and framed him. At this moment, Yeon-sik happened to learn that Hyejin had received a mysterious phone call and left. This made him think that Min-sik was going to give the evidence to Hyejin. Yeon-sik hurriedly called Hyejin to ask her to come back. However, Hyejin insisted on going to find out the truth about her mother from Min-sik. With no other choice, Yeon-sik decided to go there himself to stop her. Thus, Hyejin's simple meeting caused three groups of people with different intentions to head to the same place. Hyejin, carrying Taejin's evidence, planned to meet Min-sik and then go straight to the police station. At that moment, Min-sik had something to handle and needed a little more time to arrive. So-yeon, however, followed Hyejin's footsteps and arrived before the others. As soon as she arrived, she saw the DVD in Hyejin's hand. She knew that it was the evidence proving Taejin's crime. This made So-yeon extremely angry. Feeling that Hyejin's existence was a direct challenge to her, she immediately rushed forward to grab the CD and destroy it. In the struggle, the CD fell off the cliff. It was the only evidence that could clear Taejin's name. Hyejin risked her life and rushed forward to retrieve it. As expected, an accident occurred. Hyejin slipped and fell down the cliff. Fortunately, So-yeon acted quickly and grabbed Hyejin. Yeon-sik, who had arrived from a distance, witnessed the scene. He thought the CD in Hyejin's hand was the evidence of his accidental killing years ago. To prevent the CD from falling into the wrong hands, Yeon-sik hardened his heart and did not go to rescue them. At that moment, So-yeon had the same thought as Yeon-sik. As long as Hyejin was gone, all obstacles would be removed. Yeon-sik left, filled with guilt and heartbreak. He could only cry in the car, repeatedly saying, "I'm sorry." So-yeon returned home. Though she felt immense guilt, it paled in comparison to the fact that she had successfully married Taejun and become the wife of a wealthy family. So she decided to take advantage of the situation and kill two birds with one stone. The next day, Miho found a suicide note in Hyejin's room. In the note, Hyejin said that since she was the daughter of a murderer, she didn't want to become an attempted murderer, so she decided to leave this world forever to atone for her sins. Sunja felt a rare sense of pity and was a little worried about Hyejin, but Yeon-sik didn't say a word from beginning to end, because he knew that all of this was fabricated by So-yeon to cover up Hyejin's death. However, what Yeon-sik and So-yeon never expected was that Hyejin was saved by Inwoo. It turned out that when Inwoo arrived at the scene, he just happened to see Hyejin falling off the cliff. Hyejin was rushed to the hospital and was treated and is now in stable condition. She regained consciousness after being in a coma for 10 days. Hyejin almost promised to marry Inwoo to repay him for saving her life. Inwoo told her that everyone thought he was the real culprit because of the suicide note she left behind. He also told her that So-yeon and Taejun were about to get married. Hyejin also learned from Inwoo that he had given Taejun the CD containing the evidence of his crimes and that he had a backup copy. This gave Hyejin hope again. However, Inwoo said that the CD alone was no longer enough to do anything to Taejun, because So-yeon had forged Hyejin's suicide note, admitting to all the crimes. Additionally, Taejun's figure was not seen in the surveillance footage from the incident site. Therefore, releasing the CD would actually be detrimental to Hyejin. Mrs. Lim was worried that Sura, who had become a vegetable, might suddenly wake up and accuse Taejun, so she instructed her secretary to find someone to eliminate Sura. Fortunately, Inwoo is alert and takes precautions, quickly transferring Sura to the same hospital where Hyejin is staying. Hyejin feels very guilty for saving Sura, who is now in a vegetative state. This makes Hyejin even more determined to find out the truth and bring the bad guys to justice. However, Sura is actually the long-lost granddaughter of the Chaebol president Soo. Sura's real name is Eun-young, and she has returned to find her family. Hyejin, however, had no idea that her path to revenge would be completely upended because of Sura. Just when Hyejin was at her wit's end, Inwoo pointed her toward a new path. He told Hyejin to live under the identity of Eun-young from now on. Inwoo explained that only by gaining immense power could they bring the villains to justice. The kind-hearted Hyejin refused to deceive President Soo and rejected Inwoo's suggestion. But when she goes back to her adoptive father for help, she sees him throwing away all of her belongings like trash. What he says to Miho breaks Hyejin's heart. Yeon-sik tells his son that Hyejin's death is insignificant compared to Soyeon's life. Hyejin still clings to the hope that her adoptive father isn't really that heartless. On the day of So-yeon and Taejun's wedding, Hyejin passed a note to her adoptive father, telling him that she was still alive and asking him to meet her on the rooftop. Yeon-sik ran to the rooftop in a rage, looking for her with a gun. He thought that Min-sik was using Hyejin to play him again. He shouted, "Come out! I saw Hyejin die with my own eyes, and you dare to play with me?" Hyojin heard his words and immediately hid. She couldn't believe that her adoptive father was also on the cliff that day. This made Hyojin's last bit of affection for her adoptive father disappear. She knew that from now on, the person who once loved her deeply no longer existed. It was this blow that finally made Hyojin decide to follow Inwoo's suggestion. She decided to use Eun-young's identity to become the granddaughter of a chaebol and carry out her plan for revenge. Actually, there was a reason why Inwoo was helping Hyojin so much. That day, Inwoo told Hyojin the real reason. 20 years ago, the young Inwoo witnessed his mother being murdered. The person who killed Inwoo's mother was Taejun's mother. In fact, Inwoo and Taejun were half-brothers. However, Taejun and his mother did not know about this relationship. Now, Inwoo not only wants to avenge his mother, he also wants to avenge Eun-young, President Su's only relative, by taking revenge on Taejun. After all, President Su raised Inwoo. As a lawyer, he cannot stand by and watch those who have committed crimes live freely. Therefore, helping Hyojin take revenge is the same as avenging himself. Thus, the fates of the two people with a common goal became intertwined. To make everyone believe that Hyojin is truly dead, Inwoo uses a decomposing corpse to have Yeon-sik and others identify the body. He transfers all the information that could prove Hyojin's identity onto the corpse, believing it to be the truth. Yeon-sik arranges a funeral for Hyojin, but what no one could have anticipated is that the one most heartbroken is Hyojin's adoptive mother, who has always hated her. After all, Hyojin was the daughter she had raised from childhood with great effort, and she had developed deep feelings for her. If it weren't for the reason involving Hyojin's biological father, the daughter she truly loved in her heart would still be the most understanding Hyojin. Hyojin then began preparing to assume her new identity. Inwoo had Hyojin memorize all of Eun-young's information. To achieve perfection, Hyojin even had to create a scar to match the one left by Eun-young's burn. After some time to recover, Hyojin officially reunited with President Su, who had never met his granddaughter. Under the identity of Eun-young, Inwoo handed over all the items related to Eun-young's reunion to Hyojin, after President Su confirmed the items and the scar on Hyojin's back. Of course, Inwoo had already arranged for the necessary DNA tests and other proof. President Su was overcome with emotion, shedding tears of joy as he finally believed that the woman before him was his long-lost granddaughter. Time flew by, and 5 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Mrs. Lim called an emergency shareholders meeting to forcibly promote Taejun to CEO. However, Taejun's capabilities were lacking, and he faced strong opposition from many shareholders. Despite this, Taejun still had the support of 48% of the shareholders. The decisive vote that could tip the scales was in President Su's hands. Just as everyone was waiting for President Su, Inwoo, who had not been seen for 5 years, suddenly appeared at the meeting. Inwoo announced in front of everyone that President Su was not abroad recuperating. Now, President Su's granddaughter had come to take full responsibility for all business matters. At that moment, a woman wearing large sunglasses appeared in front of everyone. She calmly walked to her seat. When everyone saw her delicate features, they were all shocked and couldn't believe their eyes, because in their world, this woman should have long since turned to dust. But now, not only was she alive and well, she had become the granddaughter of the chaebol chairman. However, Hyojin was now living as Eun-young and would not acknowledge her true identity. She directly opposed Taejun's proposal to become the company president. Mrs. Lim's years of planning had all come to naught, and she nearly fainted from anger. In the days that followed, we will see how Inwoo and Hyojin join forces to seek revenge for their shared hatred. Meanwhile, the true heiress of the conglomerate remains in a vegetative state. Eun-young has a daughter who is being raised by Hyojin. She is grateful that Eun-young's identity has allowed her to become a mother. Hyojin swears to Eun-young that she will treat her daughter as her own flesh and blood. So-yeon is panicking. She finds reporter Su, who has been working for her. She orders reporter Su to investigate Eun-young's background as soon as possible. How could Hyojin, who was supposed to be dead, suddenly become the granddaughter of a chaebol? However, their meeting is witnessed by Min-sik, who has been monitoring So-yeon. As Inwoo expected, So-yeon immediately begins investigating Hyojin's identity. But Inwoo and Min-sik weren't worried at all. Everything was under Inwoo's control. Soon, So-yeon obtained all of Eun-young's background information. No matter how she examined it, she couldn't find anything unusual. Hyojin, who had always been gifted in design, had achieved great success after 5 years of study abroad. This time, she started working at the company as the design team leader, in the same department as So-yeon. On her first day, Hyojin noticed that there was something wrong with So-yeon's design. In front of her subordinates, She hinted that So-yeon had been copying her designs for the past 3 years. Hyejin even took out her own designs, which were unanimously praised by her subordinates. So-yeon looked at Hyejin's designs and couldn't help but sigh to herself. On the surface, So-yeon had lost face. Suddenly, she felt that Eun-young in front of her was Hyejin. Hyejin also came to visit her ex-boyfriend, whom she had once loved deeply. Taejun saw Eun-young and couldn't help but feel uneasy, as if he were seeing Hyejin. The two only exchanged a brief greeting before ending the conversation. Hyejin swore she would make Taejun kneel before her and beg for forgiveness. So-yeon, who had been feeling uneasy all along, did not dismiss her suspicions about Eun-young's identity. She suddenly remembered a way to determine whether Eun-young was really Hyejin. When they were children, So-yeon learned that Hyejin had color blindness and had difficulty distinguishing colors. As long as she could confirm this, she would be 100% sure that Eun-young was Hyejin. So So-yeon deliberately held a design meeting. At the meeting, So-yeon asked Hyejin to fill in the colors on a colorless design drawing. Hyejin was startled because she was indeed colorblind. She knew that this was a plot devised by So-yeon to deliberately test her identity. However, Hyejin did not panic. She picked up a pen and filled in the corresponding colors on the design sketches. Seeing this, So-yeon couldn't help but doubt her suspicions about Eun-young's identity. It turned out that Hyejin had anticipated So-yeon's plan all along. She had already obtained color-correcting contact lenses from a doctor. Thus, So-yeon's attempt to test Hyejin ended in failure. However, on that day, Sunja, who was watching TV with her son, was shocked to see Hyejin appear on TV alongside So-yeon. The two immediately recognized the person on TV as the deceased Hyejin. Sunja rushed to the company to find Hyejin and confirm it. Upon seeing the real person, Sunja felt complicated emotions but still angrily scolded Hyejin for returning. Hyejin said that she was Eun-young and didn't want to have anything to do with Sunja. She called security to kick them out. At that moment, So-yeon arrived and quickly pulled her mother and brother away. She explained that it wasn't Hyejin and that she had confirmed it several times, but Sunja still found it hard to believe. That night, at a company party, Taejun, who was drunk, sang a love song that he had once sung to Hyejin. So-yeon immediately saw Hyejin crying. Feeling confused, she ran to the restroom to calm down. However, Hyejin followed her in. Her fierce eyes made So-yeon very afraid. Unexpectedly, Hyejin raised her hand and slapped So-yeon hard across the face. At that moment, Hyejin revealed her identity in front of So-yeon. It turned out that the frightening scene was just So-yeon's imagination caused by her anxiety. So-yeon was so frightened that she immediately ran out of the bathroom in a panic. She had almost wet her pants from the shock. That day, Min-sik wanted Hyejin to visit her biological father in prison. He knew how lonely his good friend had been in prison all these years, but Hyejin refused outright. In fact, although Hyejin said that she actually missed her father very much. However, what Hyejin didn't know was that her biological father had given up his chance at freedom for her. Just a short while ago, Chang-hoon had been granted early release from prison due to his good behavior. But this news was a disaster for someone else. That person was Young-sik, who had made Chang-hoon take the blame. Once Chang-hoon was released, he would pose a significant threat to Young-sik. Therefore, Young-sik immediately used his connections to find high-ranking officials and requested that Chang-hoon be kept in prison. However, the greedy high-ranking officials demanded sufficient benefits from Young-sik in exchange for their help. Over the years, despite his high position, Young-sik had always been an honest and just police officer. He couldn't come up with anything that would tempt the high-ranking officials, so Young-sik thought of Taejun's mother. Originally, Mrs. Lim didn't want to give Young-sik so much money at once, but Young-sik knew the truth about her killing In-hwa's mother 20 years ago. Mrs. Lim had no choice but to sell some of her shares to Young-sik for 1.5 billion won. However, Young-sik did not reveal In-hwa's true identity. He felt that the money was not enough, so he extorted some more from the gang boss. Young-sik then handed over all the money he had obtained to the high-ranking official. What made Young-sik angry was that after taking the money, the high-ranking official shamelessly said that he would do his best to get the job done. At this point, he knew that if he wanted to make sure that Chang-hoon couldn't get out, he would have to take matters into his own hands. So Young-sik went to the prison before dawn to meet with Chang-hoon. At this point, Chang-hoon didn't know that his daughter Hyejin had fallen off a cliff and died. Young-sik told Chang-hoon that Hyejin had lived a happy life under his care. He told Chang-hoon that for Hyejin's sake, it would be best if he didn't get out of prison. Otherwise, Hyejin would once again bear the stigma of being the daughter of a murderer and be tormented by others. Young-sik's words struck Chang-hoon deeply. As a father, He had failed to provide his daughter with a happy life. He did not want to be a burden to his daughter and tore up the release application. After doing all this, Young-sik drank alone in silence, weighed down by his heavy heart. The mistakes he had made flashed through his mind. He had killed Hyejin's mother in order to get a promotion. And he had also killed his wife's ex-husband. He had also stood by and watched Hyejin die in order to destroy evidence. He had thought he was a good police officer, but he had ended up on a path of crime that was unacceptable to heaven. The next day, Young-sik received a call from his superiors informing him that Chang-hoon would remain in custody, which made him very happy. He even bought Sunja an expensive necklace, something he rarely did. Then Young-sik took Sunja to a restaurant for a romantic date. But just then, Inwoo arrived at the restaurant with Eun-yoon's daughter. As Young-sik was greeting Inwoo, Lucy's cry of mom made Young-sik look in the other direction. He was struck by lightning, completely shocked. It turns out that Young-sik saw Hyejin walking in arm with President Soo. He excitedly walks up to Hyejin to recognize her. But Hyejin says that he has mistaken her for someone else. Young-sik refuses to believe that the girl who looks exactly like Hyejin is Eun-young. Sunja explains to Young-sik that she felt the same way when she first saw the girl. So-yeon has confirmed repeatedly that the girl is not Hyejin. Hyejin's appearance ruined Young-sik's romantic date. But even after returning home, Young-sik still couldn't calm down. However, he witnessed Hyejin's death with his own eyes and identified her body and belongings. At this point, he could only convince himself that the Eun-young he had just seen was definitely not Hyejin. Perhaps this was the only way for the guilt-ridden Young-sik to live in peace. The next day, Mrs. Lim instructed Hyejin and Taejun to go on a business trip together to select fabric for the products. This surprised Hyejin and Taejun, but So-yeon was extremely reluctant. However, this was Mrs. Lim's order, so So-yeon had no choice but to comply. It was during this business trip alone with Hyejin that Taejun revealed his true feelings. Thanks to Hyejin's efforts, they successfully selected the fabric for the products. However, Taejun did not immediately choose to return but continued to drink and chat with Hyejin. Under the influence of alcohol, Taejun expressed his dissatisfaction with his current marriage. The marriage he longed for most in his heart was still his first love, whom he deeply loved. At that moment, So-yeon was anxious at home. She was afraid that something might happen between Taejun and Eun-young. She wanted to call to ask, but the phone was turned off. Her anxiety grew, and she immediately grabbed her coat and rushed out to investigate. At the same time, In-woo, who shared So-yeon's concerns, was also worried. Hyejin picked up the phone but couldn't find a reasonable excuse to call. Meanwhile, Taejun, who was drunk, was helped into a hotel room by Hyejin. Just as Hyejin was about to leave, Taejun suddenly muttered, "Hyejin, don't go. I'm sorry, I hurt you. Please forgive me. You are still the one I love the most." Every word Taejun said pierced her heart deeply. Hyejin didn't linger and ran out of the room in pain. Just as she was about to leave, she unexpectedly ran into So-yeon, who was rushing over in a hurry. Hyejin immediately hid the sadness she had just felt. She was glad that this incident had caused So-yeon emotional pain. In order to make So-yeon feel even worse, she deliberately provoked her, saying, "The rest is up to you. Taejun, I hope you two have a pleasant evening." When Hyejin returned to her room, she received a concerned phone call that touched her deeply. Hyejin never expected that In-woo had also come here. Just like So-yeon, after spending so many years together, In-woo had fallen deeply in love with Hyejin. Unable to express his feelings, he could only choose to silently protect the one he loved. The next day, So-yeon and Taejun had a big argument in the car because she was unhappy. This was exactly what Hyejin wanted to see. When Taejun started saying harsh words, So-yeon stepped back and put on a pitiful expression. Taejun couldn't bear to see her like that, so he hugged her and comforted her. So-yeon immediately showed a mischievous smile. In-woo reminded Hyejin to be extra careful and not let So-yeon find out her true identity. Hyejin was confident and told In-woo not to worry, adding that she would speed up her revenge. That day, President Soo was at the hospital for a checkup and was about to leave when he accidentally saw a patient with a scar on their back that matched his granddaughter's. What shocked him even more was that the ward was covered with photos of his great-granddaughter Lucy. He had no idea that this comatose girl was his real granddaughter. Confused, President Soo quickly had someone investigate all of Eun-young's information. However, In-woo had already tampered with Eun-young's real information at the hospital. Nevertheless, President Soo still found out that the girl was his adopted son, whom In-woo had been taking care of. Feeling that something was not right, President Soo asked his secretary to continue investigating. Meanwhile, The doctor advised Inwoo to give up on Eunyoung's treatment. Eunyoung's immunity was continuously declining. In the days that followed, Eunyoung grew increasingly distressed, just as Inwoo had resolved to let go and allow Eunyoung to depart. Eunyoung miraculously opened her eyes. If you were to tell me this was not a case of being startled awake, I would not believe it. However, after the doctors conducted a thorough examination of Eunyoung, they delivered the good news. Eunyoung was showing signs of gradual recovery. This finally gave Inwoo hope. Hyejin, upon hearing the news, also came to visit Eunyoung, hoping for another miracle and her swift recovery. Let those who have committed crimes and are still at large be brought to justice. However, the self-centered Taejun, seeing Eunyoung's face identical to Hyejin's, couldn't resist. He embraced Hyejin and confessed his feelings. He wanted to use this way to make up for his past love for Hyejin. But Taejun didn't realize that the Eunyoung before him was the very Hyejin he had once cruelly abandoned. Hyejin pushed away this shameless man with all her strength. But their entire scene was clearly witnessed by So-yeon, who couldn't let it go. Unwilling to give up, Taejun actually went to Inwoo to vent his grievances. Because Eunyoung and Hyejin looked alike, he had fallen deeply in love with her. This enraged Inwoo, who also loved Hyejin. Taejun had falsely accused Hyejin of murder and nearly killed her in the process. Now he was declaring his love for her right in front of her. Taejun even wanted to use Eunyoung to replace Hyejin and satisfy his unfulfilled love. What a shameless man! If Min-sik hadn't intervened in time to stop Inwoo, Taejun would have been beaten to death. Inwoo was so enraged that he ended up in the hospital. He was still worried that Hyejin might soften her heart and be swayed by Taejun's confession, so he asked Min-sik to keep a close eye on Hyejin's actions. He couldn't let all his efforts go to waste. Meanwhile, Min-sik was also worried that Hyejin might fall in love with Taejun again. He pleaded with Inwoo to stop that from happening. Inwoo immediately looked confused, so Min-sik no longer held back and revealed the truth that Hyejin and So-yeon were actually identical twin sisters. This left Inwoo speechless. How could fate play such a cruel joke? To prevent Hyejin from suffering a huge blow, Inwoo instructed Min-sik not to reveal the truth to Hyejin for now. However, unaware of this, Hyejin had already begun her revenge against Taejun according to plan. The company's shareholders meeting once again held a vote on whether Taejun was qualified to be the CEO. This time, thanks to the private efforts of Mrs. Lim and So-yeon, Taejun gained the support of the majority of shareholders. Even Hyejin's opposition was now powerless. This was something Hyejin and Inwoo had never anticipated. Just as Taejun was overjoyed, a recording suddenly echoed throughout the conference hall. The recording was from the car's dashcam, capturing Hyejin urging Taejun to turn himself in years ago. Taejun turned pale with fear. A group of police officers burst into the room and arrested Taejun on charges of negligent injury. Surprisingly, the happiest person was So-yeon. Without Taejun, she could now use this opportunity to become the company president. Yeon-sik visited Taejun at the police station. With the evidence irrefutable, Taejun had no choice but to cooperate with the investigation. Yeon-sik realized that he might have wrongly accused Hyejin back then, which tormented him deeply. But what shocked him even more was that not only did So-yeon know about this, but Mrs. Lim had also known the truth all along. Since Yeon-sik had previously received favors from Mrs. Lim, he had no choice but to promise to do his utmost to save Taejun. Through Yeon-sik's efforts, Taejun was able to return home safely, but So-yeon had already taken Taejun's place as the company president. Just then, Hyejin, who had not yet succeeded in her revenge, faced a major crisis. Ever since President Soo accidentally saw Eunyoung at the hospital, he had harbored deep suspicions. He instructed his secretary to spare no effort to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Eunyoung slowly regained consciousness. After being separated for over 2 decades, the grandfather and grandson finally reunited. However, President Soo was torn between joy and sorrow, because he knew that the person hiding the truth was his beloved adopted son. Inwoo also learned from a doctor friend that President Soo had discovered the truth and was instantly at a loss. Betrayed by the person he trusted most, President Soo slapped Inwoo hard across the face. This sudden scene startled Hyejin. Looking at the paternity test report in her hands, Hyejin finally realized that President Soo already knew the truth about her. President Soo was extremely disappointed in Inwoo and scolded him for wasting all the trust and cultivation he had given him over the years. This result left Inwoo and Hyejin in a desperate situation. If President Soo revealed the truth, all their plans for revenge would be ruined. But no matter how Inwoo and Hyejin begged the chairman to forgive them this once, he refused. However, not only did President Soo remain unmoved, even Eunyoung, who had regained consciousness, could not forgive them for what they had done. To Eun-young, Hyejin had not only stolen her identity, but also turned her into a stranger to her own daughter. This pain made Eun-young hate Hyejin with all her heart. In-woo had no choice but to tell President Soo the reason why Hyejin had to pretend to be Eun-young. He told President Soo that if he hadn't turned Hyejin into Eun-young and brought her back to him, you wouldn't have gone abroad for treatment with peace of mind, and you might never have seen your real granddaughter again. This made President Soo feel a little better, but Eun-young refused to forgive In-woo and Hyejin for what they had done. President Soo decided to expel them from the family according to Eun-young's wishes. But just then, Min-sik rushed in frantically and said that Eun-young's daughter Lucy was missing. This shocking news left Hyejin speechless and collapsed to the ground. However, President Soo and Eun-young believed that Hyejin was doing this to protect her identity. This left Hyejin unable to explain herself no matter how hard she tried. It turned out that the person who kidnapped Lucy was reporter Soo. Through various means, reporter Soo had already figured out the truth about Hyejin impersonating Eun-young to uncover the truth and make a fortune. So reporter Soo took advantage of the teacher's absence at the kindergarten to lure Lucy away. Unfortunately, this was witnessed by Tae-jun, who followed them. However, he was knocked unconscious by reporter Soo with a blow to the head as soon as he arrived. Reporter Soo told Hyejin not to call the police and to bring enough money. Hyejin was about to go, but Eun-young grabbed her, insisting on going with her. When the two arrived at the location, they saw that Lucy was unharmed and finally felt at ease. Reporter Soo took out a voice recorder and demanded that Hyejin publicly admit that she was not Eun-young. Otherwise he would not hand over Lucy to them. At this point, Hyejin hesitated. She knew that if she revealed the truth to reporter Soo, all her plans for revenge over the years would be in vain. But compared to the love she had for Lucy over the years, Hyejin agreed to reporter Soo's demand. After getting what he wanted, reporter Soo didn't make things difficult for them. He left with the money, feeling extremely satisfied. Tae-jun also learned the truth, which left him at a loss for words. Lucy's accident made President Soo even more determined to have In-woo leave. Hyejin and In-woo didn't insist either. Before leaving, Hyejin had a long talk with Eun-young. During the conversation, Hyejin held nothing back and told her everything about her tragic experiences and the injustice her biological father had suffered. Hyejin was very grateful to Eun-young for letting her truly experience what it felt like to have a family. Everything she did was to tell the world that her father was not a murderer and that she was not the daughter of a murderer. She just wanted to get rid of the stigma that had haunted her for more than 20 years and stand before the world with her head held high. These tragic words deeply moved Eun-young, who had also been separated from her family at a young age. She could feel how helpless and painful Hyejin was inside. In-woo thanked President Soo for his kindness to him. Hyejin also said goodbye to President Soo, but just as she turned to leave, she was pulled back by Eun-young. President Soo pondered the matter. Hyejin had, after all, been his savior. Moreover, over the years, Hyejin had developed a deep bond with Eun-young's daughter. To spare the young Lucy from emotional trauma, they also hoped that those who had committed crimes would face justice. For all these reasons, President Soo ultimately decided to allow Hyejin to remain under Eun-young's identity. Meanwhile, the real Eun-young was living under her previous name, Sura. Sura's only request was to raise her daughter together with Hyejin. This deeply moved Hyejin, who finally felt free from worries and guilt. When she saw So-yeon, who had become the arrogant and domineering CEO of the company, Hyejin decided that So-yeon must pay a heavy price for her mistakes. But at this moment, In-woo is worried about Hyejin and finds himself in a difficult situation. He knows that Hyejin and So-yeon are twin sisters. He is very worried that when the truth comes out, Hyejin will not be able to bear the blow of what she has done. Perhaps out of selfishness, In-woo decides to keep this secret and take things one step at a time. After all, without Hyejin, it will be extremely difficult for him to avenge his mother's death at the hands of Taejun's mother. In-woo went to the prison to find Chang-hoon and asked him to continue applying for early release. However, Chang-hoon was still under Young-sik's lies and refused to listen to In-woo's advice. In-woo directly asked him, "Do you want your daughter Hyejin to continue bearing the stigma of being the daughter of a murderer and be despised by others? As a father, shouldn't you clear her name and give her a clean life?" Sure enough, In-woo's words convinced Chang-hoon to make up his mind to get out as soon as possible. Then In-woo found Counselor Woo, whom Young-sik had bribed earlier, hoping he could help Chang-hoon get out early. Counselor Woo also had this idea. If Chang-hoon's case were overturned, Young-sik's years of effort would collapse instantly. Then he could have his confidant take Young-sik's position as director. At that moment, Hyejin brought Secretary Min, who had been working for So-yeon, Over. After some threats and bribes, Secretary Min revealed everything Soyeon had done. Hyejin was furious and wanted to kill Soyeon right then and there. It turned out that the kidnapping of Lucy was also orchestrated by Soyeon. Moreover, the person who reported Taejun and played the recording evidence at the shareholders' meeting was also Soyeon. Hyejin was satisfied with the answers and ordered Secretary Min to work for her from now on. A genuine smile can give one more strength. Today is Inwoo's birthday. Everyone threw a surprise birthday party for Inwoo. Lucy even gave him a carefully prepared gift. At that moment, Inwoo was happy. However, Hyejin took advantage of this good opportunity to deal a fatal blow to Soyeon. Inwoo deeply expressed that he would always stand by her side. Hyejin visited Taejun's house under the guise of Eun-young and brought Secretary Min along. Her goal was clear: to expose Soyeon's selfish act of reporting Taejun. Soyeon happened to return at that moment, but it was too late to stop her. Secretary Min revealed everything about how Soyeon had framed Taejun. Mrs. Lim raises her hand and slaps Soyeon hard across the face. Soyeon has no choice but to kneel down and beg her mother-in-law for forgiveness, saying that she did it all because of Taejun. If Taejun hadn't confessed his feelings to Eun-young, she wouldn't have done such a thing. But such excuses are useless. Taejun bluntly tells Soyeon to leave the house immediately. As soon as Soyeon returns to her parents' house, she faints and is rushed to the hospital for treatment. Hyejin, who heard the news, couldn't miss this opportunity for revenge. She came to the hospital room and confronted Soyeon, asking her why she kidnapped an innocent child. "You have committed an unforgivable crime. My revenge has only just begun." Young-sik was on the verge of being promoted to a senior government official. The fact that Soyeon had ruined her husband's career and been disowned by her in-laws would affect him. Young-sik had previously let Chung-hoon take all the blame for his own fame and fortune. Now, how would he deal with Soyeon? Soyeon did not realize her mistake and blamed Taejun for everything. As soon as Sunja heard that it was Eun-young's fault, she rushed to the company to find Hyejin and get revenge for Soyeon. However, her actions did not help Soyeon in any way. Taejun wanted to get back together with Hyejin even more. He no longer hides his feelings and directly tells Inwoo that no matter what happens, he will not let go of Hyejin. Inwoo angrily scolds Taejun for making Hyejin suffer so much and says he doesn't deserve this love. He also warns Taejun that as long as he is around, this will never happen. Hyejin further retaliates by intentionally provoking Soyeon and going on a date with Taejun. Sunja immediately tries to teach Hyejin a lesson. Taejun hurriedly pulls Sunja away and protects Hyejin behind him. Soyeon catches up with Hyejin, who is trying to leave, and immediately starts fighting. But Hyejin is not the same person she used to be and pushes Soyeon to the ground. The only way to resolve this crisis is for Soyeon to get pregnant. Soyeon pretends to be happy and tells her parents that she is pregnant with Taejun's child. Young-sik is even happier than Soyeon. This way, he could deal with Soyeon and get promoted to director without any worries. Young-sik immediately took Soyeon to Taejun's house. For the sake of his future, Young-sik knelt on the floor with Soyeon and begged Mrs. Lim for forgiveness. But even then, Mrs. Lim remained unmoved. So Young-sik had no choice but to reveal that Soyeon was pregnant with Taejun's child. Mrs. Lim felt a slight excitement, but Taejun looked gloomy. Young-sik thought that after resolving Soyeon's matter, he could finally rest easy. But he learned that Chung-hoon was preparing to apply for early release. He hurriedly went to find Chung-hoon and put on a kind father's act. Young-sik once again used the lie that he was doing everything for Hyejin's sake to beg Chung-hoon not to be released. This time, Chang-hoon was persuaded by Young-sik again. In-woo, upon learning that Chung-hoon had changed his mind, rushed over to persuade him that he could be released immediately if he agreed. However, Chang-hoon had already believed Young-sik's lies and believed that staying in prison was the best way to protect Hyejin. Just as he was about to leave, Hyejin personally came to the prison to persuade her father. Hyejin tells her father that if he truly loves her, he should get out of prison immediately and prove to the world that she is not the daughter of a murderer. The next day, Chang-hoon is released from prison and regains his freedom. Hyejin and In-woo rush over to greet him. Meanwhile, the person most afraid is Young-sik, who tries to stop them. But it is already too late. Chang-hoon and Hyejin's reunion exposes Young-sik's ugly true nature. He began to feel grateful to Young-sik for raising his daughter. But when he heard Hyejin recount all the injustices and suffering she had endured over the years, Chang-hoon realized that he had been deceived by Young-sik. He also revealed the truth about why he had not left prison, which was because of Young-sik's lies. At this moment, Hyejin's image of her adoptive father was completely shattered. However, the truth that followed caused Hyejin to begin to hate her foster father who had raised her. In-woo, in order to help the father and daughter, urged Chang-hoon to reveal the truth about the accidental killing from years ago. Chang-hoon no longer hid the truth and told them that the real murderers of Detective Park and Hyejin's mother were Young-sik and his accomplices. Upon learning the truth, Hyejin completely gave up on her foster father. Chang-hoon also finally understood the suffering Hyejin had endured over the years. He told In-woo that as long as he could seek justice for Hyejin, he would cooperate unconditionally with them to take down Young-sik. However, all their conversations were secretly overheard by reporter Soo. This was an unprecedented piece of news for him. At that time, Young-sik, who was in the midst of a promotion, knew that Chang-hoon's reappearance would be a major threat. He ordered his gangsters to find Chang-hoon and kill him. So-yeon temporarily secured her position as the wife of a wealthy family by claiming she was pregnant. However, Hyejin didn't believe So-yeon was really pregnant. Sure enough, Min-sik's investigation uncovered the truth. Seeing her own sisters now killing each other, Min-sik was at a loss for what to do. At this point, Chang-hoon still didn't know that So-yeon was his other daughter. He said he would make a decision after meeting his other daughter in a few days. Min-sik had been keeping So-yeon's true identity a secret all along, following In-woo's advice. If he were to tell Chang-hoon now that his other daughter had been raised by Young-sik, Young-sik would have raised both of his daughters. In-woo feared that Chang-hoon would abandon his revenge against Young-sik. At this moment, In-woo bore all the burden alone. He tells Min-sik that he will take full responsibility once this matter is settled. Since the truth cannot be revealed for the time being, Hyejin, who is unaware of the situation, takes increasingly violent revenge on her younger sister So-yeon. Young-sik receives an anonymous package and finally learns the truth about So-yeon's fake pregnancy. In a fit of rage, he slaps So-yeon hard across the face. At this moment, Young-sik feels extremely disappointed in So-yeon. Then Tae-jun also received an anonymous package sent by Hyejin. It clearly confirmed the truth about So-yeon's fake pregnancy. So-yeon, reaping what she had sown, was once again subjected to Tae-jun's merciless scolding. Tae-jun went straight to his mother to reveal the truth, but unexpectedly received a video. Upon opening it, he saw the surveillance footage of himself hurting Sura 5 years ago. Tae-jun immediately swallowed the words he was about to say to his mother. Back in his room, he was puzzled about who could have such evidence to threaten him. Tae-jun immediately ruled out So-yeon. He believed that So-yeon was his accomplice and would never do something to harm him, but he never expected that the person behind it all was So-yeon herself. So-yeon intended to use this evidence to keep Tae-jun under her control. However, believed that all of this was Hyejin's doing. This time, reporter Soo brought out the recording that proved Eun-young's true identity as Hyejin. At this point, So-yeon finally knew Hyejin's identity. This made So-yeon realize why Eun-young had been hostile towards her from the beginning. It turned out that Hyejin was not dead and had returned to take revenge on her. The next day, Min-sik couldn't resist Chang-hoon's pleas and took him to see So-yeon. Chang-hoon finally saw his other biological daughter for the first time. However, he still didn't know that So-yeon's adoptive father was Young-sik. At this moment, So-yeon was preparing to fight back against Hyejin. She went straight to Hyejin's office and exposed her identity. At this point, Hyejin no longer had any reason to hide herself. Having gotten a clear answer, So-yeon threatened to reveal to everyone that she was the daughter of a murderer. Hyejin remained unmoved and said that she would tell Mrs. Lim the truth about So-yeon's fake pregnancy. So-yeon arrogantly told Hyejin to hurry up and tell the truth. Mrs. Lim was shocked to learn that her daughter-in-law was faking her pregnancy and fainted on the spot. After waking up, she immediately demanded that her son and daughter-in-law divorce. Desperate, So-yeon turned to her father for help. Young-sik couldn't allow So-yeon to divorce Tae-jun, as it would hinder his promotion. He reluctantly revealed a shocking secret that could counter Mrs. Lim's influence. Young-sik revealed the truth that Mrs. Lim had killed In-woo's mother 20 years ago. He also revealed the truth that In-woo was Tae-jun's half-brother from the same father. This secret instantly gave So-yeon hope again. Meanwhile, In-woo was also rushing to prepare for the next plan. They planned to use a press conference to expose Young-sik's ugly true colors. Then they would use the current rumors to expose Mrs. Lim's crimes. This decades-long revenge plan would finally come to a perfect end. In-woo instructed Hyejin to be on guard against So-yeon at this critical moment. News of the press conference quickly reached Young-sik. He immediately urged Kyujin to make sure Chang-hoon was eliminated tonight. However, this murder plan was inadvertently foiled by So-yeon. So-yeon rushes to warn In-woo to abandon his plan to avenge his deceased mother. In exchange, she will forgive Inwoo and Hyejin for the harm they caused her in the past. Inwoo knows Soyeon's true identity. He looks at Soyeon as if she were an idiot. Inwoo tells Soyeon that Young-sik will be completely defeated after today. He tells Soyeon to go home and wait for the good news. Inwoo's words aroused Soyeon's suspicion. Soyeon immediately called reporter Soo and asked him to find a way to take Chung-hoon away. So reporter Soo found an excuse and tricked Chung-hoon away. Therefore, when waiting for Kyujin to come and kill Chung-hoon, no one was there. He could only take out his anger on the unfortunate Min-sik. The news that Chung-hoon was still alive made Young-sik restless. If Chung-hoon told the truth, everything he had worked so hard for would be reduced to ashes. Chung-hoon, who was kidnapped by Soyeon, was lucky to have his life spared. When Chung-hoon realized that the person who kidnapped him was Soyeon, he couldn't believe it. How could his own daughter kidnap him? What was even more unbelievable was that both of his daughters had been adopted by Young-sik. Unaware of the truth, Soyeon scolded Chung-hoon for killing the man she believed to be her biological father. Chung-hoon tried to reveal the truth but was slapped by Soyeon. Soyeon demanded that he kneel down and apologize. Chung-hoon watched his daughters leave and felt immense pain. He didn't understand why his two daughters had come to this. Meanwhile, Soyeon was preparing to use Chung-hoon to take revenge on Hyejin, while Inwoo and Taejun are frantically searching for Chung-hoon. Inwoo receives information about Chung-hoon's location. At the same time, Young-sik receives an urgent call from Soyeon saying that she has been kidnapped by Chung-hoon and to come quickly to save her. Inwoo quickly finds Chung-hoon at the address, but just as they are leaving, Soyeon and reporter Soo appear. Soyeon pretends to be kidnapped and stays there alone. Soon, Young-sik finds Soyeon in the warehouse with a large group of police officers and reporters. Soyeon successfully convinces everyone that she is the victim. She blames Hyejin for kidnapping her. Soyeon reveals Eun-young's true identity as Hyejin. She tells Young-sik that Hyejin had Chung-hoon kidnap her to get revenge on them. Young-sik believed all of Soyeon's lies to deal with the severe crisis they were facing and have enough strength. Young-sik had no choice but to bring Soyeon back to Taejin's house to beg for forgiveness. But this time, Young-sik didn't grovel. He came prepared and confident. Mrs. Lim wasn't happy to see them, but Young-sik directly mentioned the murder she committed 20 years ago. Now Mrs. Lim has no choice but to sit down and listen to the details. After listening to Young-sik's story, Mrs. Lim is shocked to learn that Inwoo is the son of the woman she killed. In other words, Inwoo is the son of her husband and her ex-wife. Taejun is also devastated. Inwoo has suddenly become his own brother. However, his mother killed his brother's mother with her own hands. Mrs. Lim immediately explains to her son that it was a mistake at the time. Taejun couldn't accept this blow and left in anger. Then Soyeon exaggerated the situation and told Mrs. Lim that Inwoo and Hyejin had been plotting this revenge for years. This made Mrs. Lim feel an immediate sense of crisis, and she immediately sought help from Young-sik. Young-sik said that as long as Mrs. Lim accepted Soyeon, he wouldn't reveal the fact that she had killed someone 20 years ago and had sheltered Taejun from his crimes 5 years ago. Thanks to Soyeon's scheming, she not only returned to the wealthy family as a daughter-in-law, but also got her mother-in-law and father to work for her. Sunja, who was bewitched by Soyeon, immediately condemned Hyejin. Sunja blamed Hyejin for everything that had happened to Soyeon. This slap was like 1,000 arrows piercing Hyejin's heart. Not only did they live like slaves in their hometown for so many years and suffer all kinds of torment, but they were also sworn enemies. This time, Hyejin was determined to make Soyeon's family pay dearly for what they had done. Now, Soyeon had framed Chung-hoon, who had just been released from prison, for kidnapping. Hyejin vowed that even if she had to kill Soyeon, she would not let her biological father suffer another injustice. But just as Hyejin was planning her next move, Chung-hoon came over to tell her not to continue. Chung-hoon came to tell Hyejin to stop. Hyejin was puzzled by her father's actions. To prevent the two sisters from continuing to kill each other, Chung-hoon had no choice but to reveal the truth about what happened 30 years ago when the two sisters were born and Soyeon was taken away. Chung-hoon hoped that Hyejin would let go of her hatred for Soyeon and start a new life. This news was too much for Hyejin to accept at once. Even if Soyeon was her own sister, she couldn't abandon her hatred, because Soyeon had hurt Hyejin too deeply. Hyejin simply couldn't pretend nothing had happened. At that moment, Chung-hoon decided to give up his revenge against Young-sik and disappear for the sake of his two daughters. He didn't want his revenge against Young-sik to harm Soyeon. Inwoo believed Chung-hoon's decision was irresponsible. It would only make Hyejin, who had already suffered for 30 years, even more miserable. Inwoo bluntly tells him that the only way to save the two sisters is to expose Young-sik. He hopes Chung-hoon will think more about Hyejin, who has suffered so much. before making a decision. Chang-hun's decision to give up also directly affects In-woo's plan to avenge his mother. In-woo, in order to make Chang-hun change his mind, tells Min-sik to find reporter Soo at all costs. He wants reporter Soo to reveal all the evil deeds So-yeon has done in front of Chang-hun. Perhaps only then will Chang-hun expose Young-sik's true colors to the world. Hyejin had been wavering in her resolve. However, the company's official website suddenly revealed that Hyejin is the daughter of the murderer Chang-hun. Hyejin immediately realized that this was Soyeon's doing. This made her wavering heart harden once again. At the same time, So-yeon, who was unaware of the truth that was about to be revealed, was gloating. She thought that revealing Hyejin's identity to the public was a huge blow to Hyejin. However, So-yeon didn't know that Hyejin had already run to Sunja. Without any hesitation, Hyejin revealed the truth that So-yeon was Chang-hun's daughter. Sunja didn't believe it and thought that Hyejin was lying to get revenge on her. Nevertheless, she went to the hospital where she gave birth to inquire about the truth. The elderly nurse who knew the truth did not hide anything and revealed that one of the twins had been taken away by someone else back then. This caused a loud noise in Sunja's head, and she panicked and hurriedly left. She suddenly realized that what Hyejin had said might be true. After returning home and carefully recalling the past, Sunja finally remembered that 30 years ago, due to her difficult childbirth, her biological daughter had died. The shock caused her to lose her mind and she mistakenly took someone else's child home as her own. This truth almost suffocated Sunja to death. Meanwhile, In-woo successfully arrested reporter Soo. Faced with such a despicable person, In-woo vented all his pent-up emotions on reporter Soo. Under the brutal beating, reporter Soo had no choice but to agree to cooperate with In-woo and reveal Soyeon's misdeeds. However, just then, Min-sik rushed over in a panic to tell In-woo that Chang-hun had suddenly disappeared. At the same time, So-yeon was terrified by the person who suddenly appeared before her. So-yeon was afraid that Chang-hun had come to kill her, but Chang-hun told her not to be afraid and gently said, "I am your biological father." So-yeon burst into laughter upon hearing this. She believed this was another scheme by Hyejin and Chang-hun to frame her. So-yeon was convinced that Chang-hun was the murderer of her biological father. Watching So-yeon leave, Chang-hun felt a mix of emotions. Min-sik then found him and brought him to reporter Soo. In-woo told Chang-hun to hear about Soyeon's misdeeds from reporter Soo before making his final decision. Facing life and death, reporter Soo revealed all of Soyeon's evil deeds. This made Chang-hun even more distressed. Chang-hun did not harm reporter Soo and let him go, but he warned him to keep what he had just said buried deep in his heart and never reveal it. Unexpectedly, the clever reporter Soo, in order to save his life, took Young-sik's ultimate secret and used it to seek protection. Young-sik immediately sent reporter Soo to Kyujin. He then called Kyujin and told him to make sure reporter Soo didn't see the light of day tomorrow. Young-sik intended to eliminate everyone who knew his secret. At that moment, the greatest threat to him was Chang-hun, who was still hiding. Young-sik planned to capture Chang-hun and send him back to prison. However, he suddenly received a call from Mrs. Lim demanding that he immediately revoke the warrant for Chang-hun's arrest. After hanging up the phone, Young-sik was furious and shouted at So-yeon. It turned out that Sura had told them the truth about So-yeon kidnapping Chang-hun in order to help Hyejin. She used the truth about Tae-jun hurting her 5 years ago as a condition to make Mrs. Lim reveal the truth about So-yeon kidnapping Chang-hun to Young-sik. This outcome was not what Young-sik wanted. He couldn't rest easy unless Chang-hun was dead. Young-sik ordered Kyujin to secretly kill Chang-hun by any means necessary. This forced Chang-hun and Min-sik to go into hiding again. Hyejin was furious at Young-sik's actions and completely broke ties with him. She scolds Young-sik for using his kindness and raising her as an excuse to cover up the truth of his mistakes. "You just wanted to shut my father up. I'm just a shield in your hands." Hyejin vows that one day she will make him kneel and beg for forgiveness. Since learning the truth about Soyeon's identity, Sunja feels deeply guilty towards Hyejin. Over the years, she had hurt and humiliated Hyejin because of her status as Chang-hun's daughter. At that moment, Sunja could only kneel before Hyejin and beg for her forgiveness. Hyejin, despite the pain in her heart, said that regret would come later. It was already too late. Sunja, in agony, went to her ex-husband's grave, believing this was heaven's punishment for her. The 2 daughters she had worked so hard to raise were actually the children of her enemy. Sunja was at a loss as to what to do, but the next truth was even more difficult to accept. Hyejin also came here and revealed the true identity of her ex-husband's killer. For the past 30 years, Sunja had served the man who destroyed her family with all her heart. Without knowing the truth, she shook Hyejin violently, hoping that it was all a lie. But Hyejin only gave her one piece of advice: never trust that monster Young-sik again. Sunja, who was wavering, still clung to a sliver of hope. However, her subsequent test of Young-sik proved that Hyojin was telling the truth. Young-sik, caught off guard, claimed that the accident was just a coincidence. Those words alone spoke volumes. Sunja could no longer bear the blows and fainted. She was rushed to the hospital and remained in a coma. Young-sik had just learned from Sunja that Seo-yeon was Chang-hoon's daughter. This enraged him, and he blamed everything on Hyojin and Chang-hoon. He urged Kyujin to find Chang-hoon and kill him. At that moment, Chang-hoon wanted to resolve the hatred between his two daughters and brought them together. It was precisely because of his actions that Seo-yeon revealed Chang-hoon's address to Young-sik. It must be said that Seo-yeon really had no humanity at this point, even though she already knew that Chang-hoon was her biological father. Seo-yeon said that it didn't change anything. In this world, only one of her and Hyojin could live. At this moment, Young-sik wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the two people who posed the greatest threat to him. He ordered Kyujin to go to a designated location and kill Chang-hoon. Then he called his subordinates to prepare to capture the leader of the Black Society. Kyujin. Just as Chang-hoon was feeling overwhelmed by the situation with his two daughters, Kyujin burst in with a gun. Seo-yeon was so scared she didn't know what to do. Hyojin, determined to protect her father, rushed forward to block Kyujin, but she was no match for Kyujin and was knocked to the ground in an instant. This completely enraged Kyujin. In the end, Chang-hoon was shot and killed while trying to protect his daughters. Young-sik had timed it perfectly and arrived at the scene just then. Seeing that Chang-hoon was already dead, he first told Seo-yeon to leave immediately, but just as Seo-yeon was panicking and trying to get downstairs, gunshots rang out again. It turned out that Young-sik had shot Kyujin to silence him. That was his plan. He wanted to use Kyujin's hands to kill Chang-hoon. This way, Young-sik could not only eliminate his two biggest threats but also earn credit for it. But just as he thought everything was over, he heard news that Chang-hoon was still alive. After emergency treatment, Chang-hoon's life was saved, but he fell into a coma. Unexpectedly, Young-sik took advantage of the absence of others to sneak into Chang-hoon's hospital room and remove the oxygen mask. Young-sik's murderous act was witnessed by Seo-yeon. Seo-yeon watched helplessly as her biological father was suffocated to death by her adoptive father. Not only did she not blame Young-sik, but she also helped clean up the crime scene. Just as they entered the elevator, Hyojin and Inwo happened to pass by. When Hyojin arrived at the hospital room, the doctor informed them that Chang-hoon had died after his condition worsened and resuscitation was unsuccessful. At this moment, Young-sik made a promise with Seo-yeon to bury today's events deep in their hearts and never speak of them, because only Chang-hoon's death could allow them to live in peace. At this moment, Seo-yeon had completely lost her humanity for the sake of herself. She even had the nerve to run to Chang-hoon's grave in tears and tell him not to hate her, saying that his death was the best outcome. Taejun came to Seo-yeon and advised her to stop the hatred between her and Hyojin. Hyojin is now your only family. Seo-yeon firmly refused to admit that she had a family member like Hyojin, including Chang-hoon. She never thought that she had done anything wrong. After Chang-hoon's death, Hyojin and Inwoo began a fierce plan for revenge. They handed over all the evidence they had collected over the years of Seo-yeon and Mrs. Lim's crimes at the company to the prosecutor's office. To make matters worse, Seo-yeon was summoned by the prosecutor's office for investigation, so she knelt in front of Hyojin to beg for peace and admitted that she was Chang-hoon's daughter. Hyojin had suffered greatly because of Seo-yeon over the years and remained unmoved. She said she would only consider it if Seo-yeon admitted in front of the whole world that she was Chang-hoon's daughter. Taejun didn't want to see Hyojin and Seo-yeon continue to hurt each other. He rushed over to persuade Hyojin, but this scene was witnessed by Seo-yeon. Seo-yeon drove her car at full speed, intending to run over Hyojin. In the end, Taejun took full responsibility for Seo-yeon and his mother and turned himself in. He hoped that Hyojin and Inwoo would stop their revenge. Seo-yeon urgently asked her adoptive father to intervene, but at this point, Mrs. Lim had lost her home and was no longer of any use to Young-sik, because Mrs. Lim had to transfer the company to Inwoo to repay her debts. Young-sik directly told Seo-yeon to shift all the blame onto Mrs. Lim. At this point, Young-sik had completely unleashed the evil he had been hiding deep inside. Min-sik wanted to avenge Chang-hoon and planned to assassinate Young-sik, but was stopped in time by Hyojin and the others. If Min-sik had killed Young-sik at that moment, it would have been the best outcome, because Young-sik intended to frame Hyojin for the attempted murder using Min-sik. Therefore, Min-sik had no choice but to confess that it was his own doing. In the end, Young-sik, filled with hatred, bribed other inmates in prison to kill Min-sik. By the time Hyojin and Inwoo heard the news, Min-sik had already been reduced to ashes. Yeon-sik took the divorce agreement that Tae-jun had already signed and asked So-yeon to sign it. In order to protect himself, Yeon-sik had no choice but to force So-yeon to divorce Tae-jun as soon as possible. Now, he only cared about himself. Fortunately, So-yeon's feelings for Tae-jun were genuine. So-yeon looked at Tae-jun, who had taken the blame for her, and said that she would never divorce him. However, to comply with Taejun's request and avoid further conflict with Hyejin, she decided to leave forever. Tae-jun heard the despair and determination in So-yeon's words, but he could only watch as she stood up and left, filled with anxiety. After receiving a debt collection call, So-yeon's last line of defense was completely shattered. After successfully taking revenge on So-yeon, Hyejin turned her attention to her adoptive father. She saw in the surveillance footage that Yeon-sik had entered and exited the hospital room on the day her biological father died. Although there was no direct evidence to prove that Chang-hoon was killed by Yeon-sik, Hyejin was certain it was Yeon-sik's doing. So Hyejin told the reporter in front of her about the surveillance footage and Yeon-sik's intentional shooting of Kyujin, asking him to report on it. She wanted Yeon-sik to be humiliated at the upcoming hearing and lose his chance at promotion. However, Yeon-sik quickly received word of this and summoned the reporter to his office to threaten him. He warned him that if he dared to report those things, he would make sure he had no place to be buried. Meanwhile, Hyejin and Inwoo directly approached Yeon-sik's superior and exposed all the crimes he had committed. Enraged, the superior returned and berated Yeon-sik harshly. If Yeon-sik got into trouble, his superior would also be implicated. He directly warned Yeon-sik to resolve this matter by any means necessary, or else resign from the police department. Driven by ambition, Yeon-sik was determined to protect his promotion at all costs. He believed that if he killed Hyejin, no one would be able to stop him. However, Yeon-sik, blinded by power, eventually regained his senses, put down the gun, and walked away. He knew that if he had fired the gun, everything would be over. At that moment, So-yeon was at her biological father's grave, confessing her sins, but there was no such thing as a do-over in this world. Hyejin, hiding nearby, scoffed at So-yeon's confession. As she was about to leave, So-yeon collapsed in tears. Hyejin didn't stand by and watch her die. She rushed So-yeon to the hospital for treatment. Tae-jun received the news and rushed to the scene. It turned out that Mrs. Lim didn't want her son to suffer and had turned herself in to take the blame for Tae-jun. At that moment, the hospital's examination concluded that So-yeon's acute kidney failure had relapsed. If she didn't undergo a kidney transplant immediately, So-yeon wouldn't have much time left to live. This was too much for Tae-jun to bear. Today was Yeon-sik's promotion hearing. Yeon-sik knew that Hyejin wouldn't let this opportunity to take revenge slip away. As soon as the meeting began, Counselor Woo directly questioned Yeon-sik about the truth behind the case of Chang-hoon 30 years ago and the recent shooting of Kyujin. Yeon-sik remained calm and said that it was Chang-hoon who killed Detective Park 30 years ago. Kyujin had no choice but to shoot to protect the hostage during the arrest. Hyejin, hearing this, clenched her teeth in anger. Then Inwoo brought in Yeon-sik's former superior as a witness. Just as Hyejin and Inwoo thought the superior would expose Yeon-sik's lies, Chiefly spoke up and confirmed that the events from 30 years ago were exactly as Yeon-sik had described. This left Inwoo even more furious than Hyejin, and he stood up to accuse Chiefly of lying. It turned out that Yeon-sik had approached Chiefly beforehand to plead for mercy. Chiefly, out of consideration for their long-standing relationship, ultimately agreed. Thus, Chiefly helped Yeon-sik distort the facts during the hearing. The first day of the hearing ended in failure for Hyejin, who lacked concrete evidence. Yeon-sik, however, wore a smug smile. He believed that as long as he survived today, none of them would escape. Tomorrow was the last chance to bring down Yeon-sik. Inwoo had no choice but to rush to find So-yeon to testify against him. So-yeon, however, wanted to use this opportunity to take revenge on Hyejin and directly refused Inwoo's proposal. She didn't realize that her very survival at that moment depended entirely on Hyejin's kidney. With no other options, Hyejin decided to testify against Yeon-sik herself. Today was the moment Yeon-sik had spent his entire life striving for to fulfill his dreams. Just when he thinks he will definitely be promoted, a key witness suddenly arrives at the hearing. Sunja takes the initiative to testify that she heard Yeon-sik admit to accidentally killing her ex-husband and Hyejin's mother. However, Yeon-sik claims that his wife is still confused and that it is all a lie. This reason renders Sunja's testimony useless. Just when Yeon-sik thinks that there will be no more obstacles and everything will be settled, So-yeon suddenly appears at the scene. So-yeon's appearance sends Yeon-sik into a tailspin. At this moment, Soyeon finally comes to her senses and stands up to clear her dead father's name. She tells everyone present that she saw her adoptive father suffocate her biological father to death with her own eyes. At that moment, the surveillance footage of Yang-sik diverting the police officers and entering Chang-hoon's ward was also released. Yang-sik was just one step away from achieving his lifelong dream, but it was shattered in an instant, and his situation changed dramatically. He collapsed at the hearing, hallucinating and seeing the people he had killed appearing before him one after another. What goes around comes around. It's not that it doesn't come, but that the time hasn't come yet. At this point, Young-sik not only failed to become the director but also became a prisoner. Does every villain regret their actions when they finally face retribution? Young-sik asked Sunja and Hyejin. If I hadn't been blinded by power and committed that accidental murder 30 years ago, would I have been happy now? No one answered his unrealistic question. I'll tell you, he said. I don't know if you'll be happy, but Sunja, Hyejin, Soyeon, and the others will definitely be happy. In the end, Mrs. Lim was sentenced to 5 years in prison due to tax issues as a result of In-woo's revenge. The ultimate villain, Young-sik, was originally sentenced to death. However, due to his sincere repentance, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment with all political rights revoked. Soyeon, suffering from kidney failure, has only 1 month left to live. Sunja kneels before Hyejin, begging her to forgive Soyeon. At this moment, Hyejin's heart is also very complicated. Even though she has taken revenge, she doesn't feel happy at all, facing life and death. Soyeon picks up a photo of her and Hyejin when they were children. At that time, they loved each other so much. At that time, her sister was always her strong support. Soyeon leaves this world completely overwhelmed by endless regret and self-blame. Hyejin didn't expect Soyeon to leave so suddenly. Although she still hated Soyeon in her heart, she was still her own sister. She had originally wanted to donate her kidney to save Soyeon, but because she was trying to resolve her own issues, she missed the chance to save Soyeon. This was not what she wanted to see. This caused Hyejin immense pain. A year passed in the blink of an eye, and time was the best medicine for healing wounds. Without hatred, Hyejin finally buried all her pain deep within her heart and lived her life with dignity before the world. Sunja also felt guilty for the pain she had caused Hyejin over the years and began to love her like a mother once more. Though Hyejin endured unimaginable suffering over the past 30 years, this experience made her cherish the hard-won happiness of the present even more. She eventually accepted In-woo's proposal. From then on, the two lived a carefree and happy life. Do you like this ending?